We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Yo guys! I'm Yuruzi. I'm back with the part 6, and this is what if Naruto was sent to the world of Inuyasha. Naruto has lost everything in the final battle. He is asked to aid a group in their journey. But will his own grief and pain get in the way? Or will this new group heal his broken soul? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 35, Battle for the Shikon, Part 1. Kagome wasted little time in recovering from her initial shock from seeing the evil blade in Naraku's clutches and pulled the bowstring of her arrow as far back as she could without breaking it. She let it fly, the tip of the projectile practically exploding with holy light as it cut through the air towards him. Naraku chuckled as he placed the blade in between the arrow and himself. Metal clashed with metal with a resounding clang as the arrow fell a distance away, the remaining sparks of her Miko power fading rapidly as Soanga sparked with small lightning bolts of red and pink. Naraku looked momentarily shocked, but it quickly passed as the pink sparks died down, leaving the blade pulsing an evil red. Well done Kagome, you have grown powerful indeed. If your power could phase Soanga for even a moment. Kagome gulped. While she had no delusions that she could defeat the power of Soanga outright, she expected for at least some of the holy energy she had poured into that attack to have affected Naraku, even slightly. The fact that he was unharmed worried and frightened her greatly. Now then, I think it's my turn. The spider demon chuckled in cold amusement before he rushed forward intent on running the Miko, who had become the bane of his existence, through. His blade was stopped just 6 inches from its target by a bright pink barrier. The two powers met in a luminous display of purple, red and pink. Naraku's twisted smile grew as he saw Kagome fall to her knees in effort to keep the barrier up, and he hadn't even used one of Soanga's ultimate attacks yet. Indeed, soon he would kill this Miko and her friends would follow shortly after. Wind Scar! Inuyasha yelled as yellow streaks of Yuki tore through the landscape, consuming all in its path. The Inuhanyo frantically searched for his friends. He had been resting near a tree at the edge of the village when the attack began, catching him completely off guard. He tried to hear them, but the growls and roars of all the low-level yokai prohibited him from doing so, and their stench also stopped him from sniffing them out. So he had to remember where they said they were going to be. And he had a horrible memory. God damn it! He yelled as he hacked another demon in half. Why does this shit always happen to me? I ain't no freaking babysitter. He leapt up high into a tree and leapt once again, about 60 feet above the ground, looking for his allies. He immediately caught sight of Sango and Kirara flying high above the horde of yokai as Sango threw her Hirikatsu, taking down 20 to 30 in a single swing. Sango! He yelled out as loud as he could, which was quite loud by the way, catching her attention. Kirara! At the wordless command the fire Nico roared and flew towards the plummeting Hanyu. Sango reached down, catching his wrist and pulling him up onto Kirara's back. Wind Scar! He yelled again, obliterating a large number of yokai trailing behind him. We have to find Kagome and Miroku. Sango said to him as she looked over her shoulder. Inuyasha nodded. Alright, but do you know where they went? Miroku said he was gonna go to the shrine and Kagome was going to pick some herbs. The herbs usually grow a few hundred paces behind the shrine, too. So we should be able to find them both pretty easy. The Hanyu remarked, making Sango raise an eyebrow. What? He snapped after a few seconds. How do you know where the herbs are? She questioned. Inuyasha sputtered for a few moments before he was able to form a coherent sentence. That's none of your business. Sango's eyes narrowed and she was about to say something else when another familiar voice reached them. I leave you alone for a few hours and already you have the place coming down around your ears. They both turned and saw Kagura as she let her wind blades fly, neatly slicing another group of demons as she floated next to them. Now isn't the time for jokes, let's find the others. Sango said evenly. Kagura nodded before she let loose another set of wind blades. X. Kagome groaned as she poured more of her holy power into merely holding off the blade. Naraku hadn't even begun using the Soanga's attacks yet, and the sword in his, already powerful hands was proving to be even more deadly than when they fought it the first time. Very impressive Kagome, you've managed to hold off Soanga a full minute. I wonder how much longer you'll last. He said with cruel mirth, like acid dripping from his tongue. As his words reached her, anger bubbled up inside of her. She knew she wouldn't last much longer at the rate her energy was being sapped from her, but she would not die kneeling at his feet like a coward. If she would die today, it was going to be with her head held up high, damn it. Naraku watched in shock as she struggled to stand, eventually reaching her full height and glaring fiercely into his eyes, angry blue met with startled red. Her barrier glowed brightly and expanded, burning him badly. He growled and leapt back. Soanga could have easily continued, but he could not last against that purification energy. When the glow died down, it revealed Kagome, standing with her bow grasped firmly in her hand and an arrow in the other. She notched it and pulled back, this time, pouring most of her energy into the attack. The entire arrow glowed and crackled fiercely with pink flames. Naraku sneered at the girl, placing Soanga in front of him and charging toward her at top speed. He was going to eliminate this nuisance once and for all. As Naraku rushed, Kagome released her arrow. The bright light practically exploded everywhere, blinding both her, Naraku, and anyone else in the surrounding area. Naraku roared as burning pain tore through his entire body. He focused his Yuki into Soanga, increasing the blade's power, pushing back the holy wave of energy and relieving him of the pain. Even so, his skin was smoking as Kagome's arrow finally faded and fell to the earth with a dull clatter. Naraku snarled at the girl. As Soanga pulsed in his hand, the blade was crying out for her blood, enjoying the power she had just unleashed, while Naraku himself was weakened by the attack. Enough, it's time I end this, Kagome. It was fun while it lasted. He spoke with arrogance he did not feel. Kagome was on her knees gasping for breath as she leaned on her bow for support. She watched with grim resignation as Naraku lunged forward, Soanga moving to stab her straight through her chest. Before he made it any further, however, a ball of fire, the size of a basketball, came from nowhere and nailed him right in the face, sending him reeling from the back. Kagome gasped as the fireball hit the floor and dissipated, revealing Shippo. She mentally screamed at the sight of the young fox kit, standing like a cat that's about to pounce. His fur and ears were standing on end and his eyes, once a gentle sea green, were now a raging blood red. Naraku sneered at the young kit, not knowing his identity. What's this, Kagome? Another fool has come to save you. I wonder why so many cling to you, first Inuyasha, then the wolf, and now this little thing. He moved to step forward. The kitsune had merely caught him off guard, and even so, the blow was a minor one with little to no pain at all. He paused, however, when the little kitsune began to glow a fierce red, his Yuki spiking to a level just short of Inuyasha's own power without the Tetsusaiga. The little kitsune sure wasn't little anymore. Naraku watched in silent fascination as the kitsune grew to the point where it was just a few inches short of 5 feet tall while standing on all fours. Kagome was watching the event with a wide-eyed, astonished expression on her face. Shippo. Kyubi, who had been silently making her way through the forest, let a slow smile filter across her features. Look, there he is. Sango yelled, pointing at the monk, who had managed to erect a barrier around the shrine with many sutras that were enhanced by some of Naruto's ninjutsu seals to protect the villagers that had gotten there in time to avoid the horde. Miroku looked up at the sound of her voice. Sango! He cried out in relief before throwing 5 more sutra, which burned a white flame before they shot through 3 demons each. Inuyasha looked to Sango. Since when can he do that? She shrugged and looked just as surprised as the Hanyu. Ha! Kagura yelled as she sent more wind blades down, neatly slicing another group that tried to break through the barrier. Inuyasha! Miroku called, this barrier can stall them well enough, but if it receives too many attacks it will fall. I didn't have time to prepare a proper one, so you must keep the yokai away from it, or the people will all be killed. Where's Kagome? I don't know, I haven't seen her since this morning. Fine, Sango, Kagura, you stay here, I'm going to find Kagome. The 2 females nodded. Before Inuyasha lunged, Sango spoke. How will you know where to look? Almost as if it was waiting for the common, a bright light that lasted a full 10 seconds came from a few dozen yards into the forest, momentarily blinding all of them. Inuyasha growled low in his throat. That's how. Before he leapt to where the light had come from, leaving a worried group behind. XX. Naraku side-stepped as the kitsune lunged at him, his long, pearly white fangs clamping down around the area where his neck once was. Naraku moved to place the blade in a ready position when one of the kitsune's tails shot forward and snaked around his neck, catching him off guard. He couldn't gain his footing before the kitsune pulled him in and stomped down on his chest, pinning him to the ground. Naraku lifted his left hand and caught the kitsune by the throat as it moved to, literally, bite his face off. He shifted the blade in his right hand and stabbed the kitsune clean through. Shippo! Kagome yelled as the kitsune's eyes again shifted into a dull green, before they closed. Naraku pushed the kid off of him where he hit the floor with a dull thud, turning back into his smaller form. The spider Hanyu stood and watched with cruel satisfaction as Kagome rushed over to the fallen Kitsune, cradling him in her arms. "Goodbye, Kagome." He chuckled before he raised the blade high above his head. Purple Yuki surrounded the blade, pulsing violently as demonic winds came from every direction, and a dark dragon with glowing red eyes emerged from it. Its form, evil and full of malice, glared hungrily at the Shikon Miko. "Go Kuryoha!" He yelled, bringing the blade down, releasing the dark blade's most powerful attack, the single technique that could never be matched by the Tetsusaiga or the Tenseiga. Kagome closed her eyes, waiting for her inevitable death. When she felt a strong arm wrap around her waist and lift her up effortlessly, she clutched at the newcomer for dear life, waiting for the roar of the attack that had nearly taken her life to die down. When she opened her eyes, she thought she would see Inuyasha, but when she saw who her rescuer really was, she had to stifle a gasp. "Ah, Lord Sesomaru, you've decided to grace us with your presence." Naraku sneered at the arrival. He was still quite confident he could match the Inu Lord on his own. What Sesomaru had in skill and technique, Naraku made up for in sheer brute strength and stamina. His ability to regenerate since acquiring his new body was far superior than even the great dog demons. A yellow light slowly approached from behind. Naraku smirked coldly as he turned and placed Soanga in front of him, neatly cutting the wind scar in half. "Ah, Inuyasha, so glad you could join us. Well, now that we're all here, let's really get started." He smirked coldly as his eyes turned completely red and Sona pulsed violently in his hand. "Hold on guys, I'll be there soon," Naruto thought as he continued leaping from treetop to treetop, still moving at top speed through Inuyasha's forest. Unknown to him, a certain vixen watched him rush past the tree she was leaning against. She smiled. "Soon Naruto, you're almost there." Chapter 36, Battle for the Shikon, Naruto's arrival. To those of you asking why Naraku hasn't been possessed by Soanga and how he can wield it, in this story, Soanga was forged from Kyubi's Fang. Since she gave it to him, she has stopped the sword from possessing him, hence why he can wield it. "Let's start." Naraku laughed cruelly, his glowing blood-red eyes watching the two Inu brothers. Inuyasha to his left, Sesomaru to his right. "So then, which one of you will I get first?" he asked himself. "Do not flatter yourself, parasite." Sesomaru spoke as he drew Tenseiga from its sheath. The blade pulsed and glowed with a calm blue glow. "That's right, bastard, today is when I'll put you down for good." Inuyasha threw a look at his older half-brother which relayed one simple message. Truce for now at least, as Tetsusaiga also pulsed, the blade glowing a bright yellow color. At this, Naraku's smirk dropped lightly but came back full force shortly after. No matter what they threw at him, there was no way he would lose to these mutts. "You first then, Inuyasha," he said as he raised the blade and sliced the air. "Go Kuryoha." Inuyasha snarled as he ran. He remembered the last time he had seen that attack. He had tried to send it back with the Bakuryoha. Let's just say that it ended with less than favorable results. He wasn't about to try his hand on it again. Sesomaru left his perch on the tree and rushed towards the Hanyu, his claws dripping with acid as he let his whip fly. Naraku turned and batted the attack away with Soanga as if it was an annoying fly, and then blocked the Tenseiga as Sesomaru took a swing at him. "Lord Sesomaru, you insult me. What good is fighting with a blade that does not cut?" He laughed mockingly at the dog demon. Sesomaru narrowed his eyes. He placed more pressure on the blade and then Naraku barely reacted in time as he stepped back, avoiding the claw swipe delivered by Sesomaru's other hand. He had been so used to seeing the dog demon with just one arm he didn't even realize he was hiding the newly restored one in his sleeve. Even so, he had 3 slashes on his face to prove his carelessness. Sesomaru's claws dripped with acid as he spoke. "I do not need a blade that cuts flesh to defeat you, Hanyu." Naraku snarled at the dog demon before rushing him again. Sesomaru took up his fighting stance and met his charge with his own. Metal clashed with metal as the two exchanged blows. Loud clangs echoed through the forest. Naraku took a horizontal swing at the dog demon, only to have Sesomaru spin once around the swing and deliver a solid elbow to the spider Hanyu's face. Naraku reeled from the blow and watched as Sesomaru's claws again glowed green with his acidic yuki. As the dog demon moved to impale him, Naraku reacted. Turning Soanga in his grasp, he stabbed it into Sesomaru's palm. Naraku's strength, added to Sesomaru's own momentum, dug the blade as deep as the forearm, just slightly above the wrist. Sesomaru cursed before pulling his hand back and punching the Hanyu away with it. Naraku smirked as he took up his fighting stance again. "Wrath!" Naraku spun around, barely having enough time to block the Tetsuzaiga as Inuyasha came at him with a downward swing. Sesomaru seized this opportunity and rushed forward, approaching Naraku from behind. The spider demon turned, one hand still holding Inuyasha back while the other turned into numerous tentacles that rushed the Western Lord. Sesomaru didn't even pause in his stride as he formed his poison whip and sliced the incoming appendages to ribbons. Naraku cursed as he pushed Inuyasha's sword to the side and kicked the dog Hanyu right in the chest, sending him sprawling back. He leapt away just as Sesomaru took a swing with the Tenseiga. However, something most unexpected occurred. When Sesomaru completed his swing, a black, cut or slice momentarily appeared in thin air, revealing a black arc that closed shortly after. As Naraku landed, he stared at the Western Lord with a new sense of caution. What the fuck was that? Inuyasha yelled as he got to his feet. Sesomaru stared dispassionately at his younger brother. That half-breed is the Tenseiga's ultimate attack, the Medo Zangetsuwa. It opens a portal into the realm of the dead. He stared back at Naraku. It kills any who touch it instantly. Naraku's eyes narrowed before he smirked. Then I suppose I had better keep you occupied, Lord Sesomaru. He turned and sliced his sword over the ground. Sesomaru and Inuyasha tensed when they felt a foul presence fill the air. An arm, rotting and half-decayed, emerged from the ground, and then a body, one of a bull demon, more soon followed, a horse demon, various low-level yokai wolf demons, until there were virtually hundreds of them. Sesomaru and Inuyasha both growled at the sight. They remembered these from the last time they had fought Soanga. Kagome gasped from her place nearby. That's right, Soanga can revive any demon it's killed. Naraku must have done this before he came. She looked uneasily at Shippu's unconscious form and bit her lip in hesitation. Finally coming to a decision, she stood and ran. When she was satisfied with the distance, she set Shippu down as gently as possible and stabbed one of her arrows next to him, erecting a small but strong barrier to protect him. She gave him one more worried glance before she grabbed her bow and rushed to get back. Meanwhile, back at the clearing, Sesomaru snarled at the parasitic Hanyu as he gave them a smug smirk. These creatures were of the undead, and so, the Tenseiga was the better weapon against them. Inuyasha! He called to his younger brother, catching his attention. You hold off Naraku, while I deal with this. Who the hell said, you're the boss of me? He snarled in anger. Just shut up and do it, Inuyasha. Came Kagome's voice before a purified arrow shot between the two, purifying 8 of the undead yokai. I'll help Sesomaru so we can get rid of them quicker, just make sure Naraku doesn't go after us. She said, notching another arrow. Inuyasha looked quite pissed that Kagome was basically ordering him to cooperate with his hated half-brother. Sesomaru chose to bite his tongue in order to hold the comment he was going to say about not needing a ningen's help. He had nearly been killed the last time he had faced Soanga. He did not want a repeat performance. Naraku snarled at her form, having forgotten that she was even there. She was always the thorn in his side. Most of his well-thought-out plans failed because of her interference. He tightened his grip on the sword of hell. He would get rid of his nuisance now. He leapt up, over both Inu brothers, landing directly in front of her. He reared his sword back, ready to kill her once and for all. Oh no, you don't! Inuyasha yelled as he interlocked Naraku's sword arm with his free one. He pulled as hard as he could, flipping the spider Hanyu over his shoulder, placing himself between him and Kagome. Naraku rolled with the momentum, getting to his feet in a second and raising his sword in preparation to use the Gokuryuha. Inuyasha, however, followed up the toss with a swing of the Tetsuzaiga. Wind Scar. The attack was launched at point-blank range. Naraku barely had time to place the Soanga in front of him for protection as it deflected most of the attack. Even so, when the dust settled, his entire body was covered in deep gashes and lacerations. Naraku snarled, "You'll pay for that, worthless mutt. Just try it, bastard." Kagome, go and get rid of those zombies. The futuristic Miko nodded before rushing past the two. Meanwhile, in a clearing just a few hundred yards away, the remaining members of the group were fighting off the army of yokai. Hirekatsu! Sango yelled, throwing her large boomerang again, slicing off the heads of 8 or 9 demons. Fuji no Mai! Kagura yelled, sending another wave of her wind blades. Miroku threw 10 sutras, which formed a semicircle in front of him. He chanted a prayer and slammed his staff on the ground. It glowed for a brief moment before several beams of white light shot out from them and headed towards the sutras, at random intervals at high speeds, purifying several of the demons in front of him with each blast. Sango caught the monk's display and swooped down, unsheathing her sword and killing another demon on the way. What on earth did you just do, Miroku? The lecherous monk smiled before showing several complicated-looking sutras wrapped to the bottom of his staff. I combined religious incantations along with Naruto-sama's seals. These at the bottom of the staff amplify my own holy energy, and the ones I threw draw it out, like a focus. Sango smiled. I'm glad. I think he'll be proud of you once he gets back. Miroku smiled and nodded. I hate to interrupt, but will you two fools stop this foolishness? We're in the middle of a battle. Kagura spoke, sending out more of her wind blades. Sango nodded. Kirara, she commanded. The fire Nico roared before she rushed up to gain altitude. Before she was out of range, however, Miroku somehow managed to cop a feel of his favorite part of her anatomy. Sango resisted the urge to bash him unconscious, for now. Once that battle was over though, he would be getting his punishment. Kirara rose until she was high above all of the other demons. Sango shifted through her weapons pouch and took out several shuriken and kunai, throwing them down, like a rain of metal. Sesomaru sidestepped a sloppy swing one of the undead attempted to deliver from behind and lobbed off the foul creature's head. The body dropped without another motion. He vanished a moment later, reappearing almost 10 yards away, the tenseiga pulsing in his hand as the dead bodies fell easily. He rushed forward again, leaping high into the air, where he landed in the center of a large group of their undead opponents. He began spinning, and in a second, a black void appeared, indicating the Mato Zangetsuo was being used. The zombies immediately caught in the attack were sucked into the void, once again going to the land of the dead where they belonged. Others remained unaffected at least until the Zangetsuo formed a complete circle around the dog demon. Now the souls of the undead demons were literally being sucked straight out of their bodies, leaving the rotting corpses lifeless once again. As Kagome launched another of her purified arrows, she couldn't help but feel rather inadequate next to the demon lord. He had just killed a lot of them in just a few seconds, while she couldn't hope to come close to that power unless she poured over 1/3 of her strength into it. Never mind that she killed roughly 20 of them with each shot. She was getting ready to launch another arrow at one of the approaching demons when something caught in her peripheral vision. One of the undead demon was literally coming out of a shadow of a tree behind Sesomaru. The Teokai was busy fending off attacks from 4 other demons and was currently too distracted to sense it. Not that it was making much sound to begin with. She turned her sights onto it, ignoring the demons approaching her, and let it fly. Sesomaru turned at the sound, and saw the arrow heading towards him. The Miko has betrayed me? It was mildly surprising. From what he could tell, she was never that kind of person. But still, she was human, and they tended to be such foolish creatures. But when the arrow merely passed him by and he heard a high-pitched screech behind him, Sesomaru looked over his shoulder to see the purifying remains of a shadow demon. He looked back at the Miko, and saw one of the demons had gotten close to her while she was helping him. She wouldn't be able to turn in time, and not even he would be able to make it there in time to save her. Kagome heard the growling behind her and turned her startled eyes behind to see a boar yokai holding a very big, very blunt-looking axe over his head, ready to bash her skull open. Kagome closed her eyes and waited for the inevitable blow when a roar came from the boar yokai. Kagome looked and gasped as an arrow stuck out from the yokai's chest before he was purified to ash. Kagome looked to where it had apparently come from and found Kikyo standing several yards away, her normal emotionless look adorning her face. Kagome was brought out of her shock as the dead priestess tossed her a spare quiver of arrows, the projectiles being held in place by a tight strap over and around them. Kagome caught the arrows as they practically landed on her chest with a small oomph. Before anyone could call the dead priestess on her actions, she simply notched another arrow in her bow and took up the fight again. Kagome chews file it away in the weirdest day of my life file in her mind. After all, first some insanely strong fox demoness warns her about the attack, then Sesomaru of all people saves her from Naraku, and now Kikyo also saves her. She sighed before placing the quiver on her back and pulling out one of the arrows. Inuyasha snarled as he struggled against Naraku. The two were locked in a deadlock. The sound of metal scraping metal was loud in both their ears. Naraku pushed Inuyasha back, swinging his sword horizontally. Inuyasha leapt up over it and delivered a kick to Naraku in the process. Naraku blocked the blow with his right forearm, keeping a firm grip on Soanga with his left. He reversed his grip on the sword and came in with an upward slashing motion. Inuyasha grunted as he used Tetsusaiga to block the attack and then head-butted the spider Hanyu, sending him reeling. Inuyasha followed up the headbutt with a slash of his claws. Iron Reaver! He cried, slashing him across the chest. Naraku stumbled back before regaining his footing. He stood still for a few moments, the silky strands of his black hair obscuring his face from view. Inuyasha breathed heavily. He smirked at Naraku's still form. When I'm done with you, they're gonna need chopsticks to pick up the pieces. Naraku smirked and began chuckling, the slow cruel laugh reverberating through the clearing. Inuyasha snarled. What the hell is so funny? Naraku's laughter died somewhat but his smirk still remained. It has been fun Inuyasha, but it's time that I end this. Over my dead body. He ground out through gritted teeth. I wouldn't have it any other way. The spider demon's smirk grew into a positively psychotic expression as Soanga pulsed in his hand, only this time it was much worse. A blood-red aura surrounded the blade, making it look like its namesake, the Sword of Hell. The aura converged around Naraku, his yoki seemed to spike tremendously, so that even Miroku and Sango could feel it from their fighting area. Naraku let a few small laughs escape him before he vanished from sight and reappeared in front of Inuyasha. The dog-eared Hanyu barely had enough time to let out a small, holy sure. Before Soanga impaled him right through the gut. He gasped and clutched the blade, stopping it from going in any further. Naraku continued to push him back until he hit a tree. Inuyasha snarled and reared his hand back to swing the Tetsusaiga when Naraku twisted the blade in his gut, along with increasing the sword's aura, which was already burning him in the first place. Inuyasha screamed, his grip on the Tetsusaiga slackening slightly, an opportunity Naraku took to beat the sword out of his grip and into another tree where it transformed back into its original state. Now, Inuyasha, it's time to die. He said in a slow, satisfied voice as he raised his free hand, which turned into a cloud of miasma, and went right into the Hanyo's face, entering his nostrils, mouth and even his eyes. His cry was strangled in his throat before his world faded into darkness. Inuyasha! Naraku heard Kagome scream. He turned slowly, reveling in the anger and worry that rolled off her in waves. When he turned though, he was surprised to see Kikyo standing just a few yards behind Kagome. Most of the undead were, well, dead already, and the ones that weren't were too injured to be any real threat. Naraku laughed as he removed the blade from Inuyasha's stomach and tossed him aside, his pale, near-lifeless form falling over with a dull thud. At the sight of his brother's lifeless form falling to the ground, Sesomaru felt a small pain in his chest. Saying they had their differences was an understatement, but still, there was just something that felt wrong about his brother, laying there at Naraku's feet. Sesomaru narrowed his eyes, the Hanyu would pay. With this thought in mind, Sesomaru cut up the last of his undead opponents and rushed Naraku, fully intent on killing him. Naraku laughed and raised his blade before meeting Sesomaru's charge with his own. The two demons met halfway, their clash sending a shockwave through the forest as their respective yuki crackled and permeated the air in its heavy, oppressing grip. Kagome felt an arm grip her shoulder. She turned to see Kikyo with a grim expression on her face. Come, we have to get Inuyasha out of here. If Sesomaru-sama gains the upper hand, Naraku could try to use him against us, or he could simply be caught in the crossfire. Kagome nodded, trying to keep her composure despite the situation, and followed Kikyo as they moved to the fallen Hanyu. Sesomaru's fight meanwhile, was getting more and more intense with every second as both demons raised their yuki higher and higher to match each other's strength. Their blows were moving too fast to be caught by human eyes. It was broken when Sesomaru dodged another of Naraku's swings and lashed out with his yuki, pushing Naraku back with enough force to send him up to the treetops. The Western Teiokai followed shortly after meeting the Hanyu in mid-air, where they again exchanged attacks. Kagome and Kikyo were currently carrying Inuyasha away from the battle when Kagome suddenly remembered something. Shippo! She yelled, startling Kikyo. The fox kit? The undead priestess asked. Yes, he was hurt during the battle. I placed a barrier around him, but I have to go get him. Kikyo paused for a moment before she hefted more of Inuyasha's weight over her shoulder. Go then. Kagome nodded in appreciation before she gently removed Inuyasha's weight from herself and ran in the direction she had left the young kid. Naraku and Sesomaru landed on a tree branch where the two took a moment to gain their balance before beginning their exchange anew, with Sesomaru again pushing Naraku back. Naraku gritted his teeth when he felt his foot reach the edge of the tree. He blocked a swing from Tenseiga, then another and a third, before Sesomaru swiped at his legs, the moment he chose to somersault over the dog demon. He swung as he passed over. Sesomaru ducked, avoiding the attack, and spun around, fluidly blocking Naraku's next swing as he landed. The blow, however, was strong enough to open his guard, leaving him open to the next attack, which was a solid kick to Sesomaru's chest, which sent the Teiokai flying back. Naraku appeared behind the Teiokai, raising Soanga. When he brought it down, however, Sesomaru simply vanished, using his yokai cloud to carry him through the air at extremely high speeds. To Naraku, the Western Lord was barely a white blur as numerous slashes appeared all across his body, the black crescent of the Zangetsuwa appearing with each of the Teiokai strikes, taking more and more of the souls that made up his whole body. His eyes bled into red. He refused to die at the hands of this dog. Soonga, sensing his lust for power and desire to live, fed off these emotions like a hungry parasite as its red aura spiked and then exploded outwards in a great wave. Sesomaru, caught off guard by this new development, didn't pull back in time and received the blast full force. Other than the minimal protection the Tenseiga offered in the onslaught, he had little more protection. The Teiokai gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out in pain, even as the wave of red Yuki washed over him. It felt as if he had descended into the deepest pit of hell. His own Yoki tried to fight against it, but even he found himself powerless against the blade of hell. When the dust settled, Naraku stood, a satisfied expression adorning his face as the Western Lord slowly stood up. His clothes were scorched, and burn marks covered nearly his whole body. Naraku laughed, raising the Sounga over his head. "Farewell, Lord Sesomaru." Before he could attack, however, he heard the twang of a bowstring reach his ears and lazily leaned back, letting the projectile pass him by harmlessly. Kagome had been on her way to get Shippo, but when she had seen the red blast hit Sesomaru, she knew that it would be too much, even for the Western Lord. While one part of her told her to run, the other would never allow her to simply leave someone to die, especially if the person had saved her before. He extended his free hand, which turned into a mass of tentacles, and grabbed the futuristic Miko by her throat, never removing his eyes from the Teiokai, stopping her from grabbing another arrow. Even so, her Miko aura struggled against his Yuki, attempting to purify him. He chuckled at her fire. "Well, Kagome, since you're so eager, you can die with him." He laughed before throwing her at the Inu. Sesomaru caught her and placed her down. He would have tried to in order to get out of Gokuryuha's attack range, but the Spider Hanyu had already proven more than capable of keeping up with him. His only choice was to try and stave off the attack with one of Tenseiga's barriers. "Miko, you are adept at barriers, are you not?" He spoke calmly, not turning to face her. As he felt her nod, he spoke again. "When he releases his attack, form the strongest barrier you can. Once the attack dies down, I will attack him. He will most likely overestimate himself and believe we will both perish with his next attack and let his guard down." Kagome nodded again and focused. Already the telltale winds were picking up as the dragons came from the blade, their red eyes speaking of hatred and bloodlust as it built up. Naraku's expression was positively gleeful. This was the moment where he eliminated his three greatest threats. Inuyasha was already as good as dead, and now Sesomaru and Kagome would soon follow him. After them, there was no one in the four great yokai territories that could stand up to him. "Farewell," he yelled as he swung. The attack was the most powerful he had released, tearing through the landscape with the force of 1,000 earthquakes. The harsh winds nearly blowing Kagome away. If not for Sesomaru holding her in place, she was sure she would have been. Kagome focused all of her strength and formed a barrier in front of them, the pearlescent white light a stark contrast to the purple wave of destruction heading for them. Sesomaru soon formed his own barrier behind hers, and the two braced themselves for the inevitable attack. A massive explosion rocked the entire area. The trees were completely uprooted and blown away. Absolutely nothing survived. Kagome's scream could barely be heard over the roar of the thrashing winds. But she was confused. She still hadn't felt any strain on her barrier. Was Sesomaru attempting to hold off the attack himself? She looked at him, but one look at his surprised eyes revealed that it was not he who was responsible to their survival. She followed his gaze and gasped as she saw the silhouette of a person beyond the dust cloud. When it finally settled, she had to stifle another gasp, and the tears of joy that threatened to fall down her cheeks. Stark blonde hair, sea blue eyes that shined with mirth, and a black face mask. Naruto stood before her, a sword with the design of a dragon being held in his grasp as it glowed blue and hissed from the heat of the previously deflected attack. "Naruto?" she asked carefully as she stepped forward. She really wanted to make sure it was him. "Don't cry, Kagome." Naruto smiled at her through his mask as he spoke reassuringly, almost as if he was speaking to a child. "Don't you know? The hero always shows up late." She smiled. Only he could pull off a joke at a time like this. Naruto's eyes lost all mirth as he turned them onto the Spider Hanyo's fearful ones. "Now then, I think you and I have a score to settle." Chapter 37, Battle of the Shikon Part 3. Naruto stared at the Spider Hanyu, his cool blue hues promising a very swift, yet very painful death to the spider demon. Naraku shook his head as he was still reeling from the shock. "This is not possible." He suddenly felt an arm sling over his shoulders. He turned and saw Naruto leaning on him as he held up two fingers as if to clarify. "Correction, not probable." Naraku snarled and swiped at the young Umbu with his blade. cutting off his head in one swift chop before the blonde vanished in a puff of smoke. "How are you still alive? You died, I know you did," he yelled in anger as he searched for the odd ninja. Death, the end of all vital functions or processes in an organism or cell, Naruto read from a dictionary he had somehow miraculously picked up from thin air before he snapped it shut and threw it at the Hanyu. Naraku shredded it to pieces as he snarled at the blonde. "Mao, and that was my last one too." Naruto whined theatrically at the sight of his torn dictionary. Naraku's fury spiked so much Naruto felt as if the temperature rose several notches as the yuki around both him and Soanga grew. The spider demon raised the evil blade in front of him and swung. Gokuryoha! The dragon twister streaked towards him, tearing up earth, rubble, trees and roots alike as it headed towards him. Naruto unsheathed his blue dragon sword and lazily placed it in front of him. When the attack finally reached him, it met with a solid, unshakable barrier. It splintered, spreading out behind him in a dazzling light show. Naruto looked around as the lights surrounded him. "Pretty," he stated after a moment. Then, he griped his blade harder and cut the air in front of him, dispelling both the barrier and the Gokuryoha. Well, the first ability is easy enough, a barrier that cannot be broken. Let's see what else I can discover about these blades. He wondered as unsheathed his second red fox sword. Naraku snarled, his entire eye glowing absolutely red as his rage spiked tremendously. Sesomaru, Teokai of the Western Lands and the strongest Mikos since the great Midoriko herself couldn't defeat him, he refused to admit defeat to this damn human. The fox sword pulsed in his hands as red chakra formed around it. However, the difference of his and Soanga's red aura was that Soanga's aura was a dark, and seemed to consume yet clash with everything that came into contact, even Naraku's own aura, never blending, always separate, while the fox sword's red aura took the form of a flame, melding with Naruto's own chakra as it slowly crept up his arm, embracing his familiar presence. Naruto closed his eyes and suddenly felt a rush. As if he was moving at very high speed before images began flashing through his mind's eye. "I see." He raised his fox blade, the chakra slowly growing outwards until it suddenly exploded in a great wave of red chakra. It looked as if a tornado of flames towered above him. The harsh winds making Kagome have to brace herself against a tree in order to keep herself steady. Naraku shielded his eyes, his anger rising as he was involuntarily pushed back. Even Sesomaru looked as if he was struggling to hold his ground. Naruto stared at the spider demon with cold resolve before he cut the air in front of him. "Kitsune Goka, Umi no Ho," he yelled as the red chakra that toured above him exploded forth, heading towards the spider Hanyu. Naraku snarled as he raised his own blade. Purple winds encircled him as he poured more power into the attack than what he had ever done before. "Gokuryoha!" he yelled with all his might as he slawed the air with the Soanga. Purple dragons flew from the blade and the surrounding winds, heading straight for the red wave of flame-like chakra that approached him. Suddenly, the red mass shifted its form to form several fox-like shapes in an imitation to the dragon heads. The two attacks clashed in a great explosion. Not even the tree Kagome had held herself against could hold against the great winds caused by the force of the blast. Both her and the unconscious Shippu would have been sent flying had it not been for a Teokai who found it in his best interest to create distance between himself and these two attacks. The Miko was just on his way. Naruto watched the two attacks collide and felt a slender arm wrap around his shoulders as delicate fingers caressed his masked cheek. He felt a definite feminine chin rest on his right shoulder and felt the rumble in her chest as she laughed. Not bad for your first try." He glanced back at her fanged smirk. "You truly don't have anything better to do, do you?" She stepped back and put her hands in the air in an "I don't know" gesture. "Eternity is a long time, have to pass the time somehow. By the way, you might want to pay attention," she said, pointing back at Naraku's direction. The blonde turned in time to see his attack break through Naraku's and continue on its way. "What, that's impossible?" Naraku thought in absolute bafflement. He barely brought himself out of his stupor in time to form one of his barriers. But, to his immense surprise and terror, he felt the orb around him weaken. To be able to break through his barrier, as well as the Gokuryoha, that power was unimaginable. He placed Soanga in front of him, allowing it to take the last vestiges of the attack. Even so, he was severely shaken up. When the dust settled, he swallowed the lump of fear in his throat and glared at the blonde with all the hatred he could muster. "This is not overhuman," he snarled as he began forming a barrier to levitate himself away. Naruto calmly connected his two blades and spun them once over his head. "Leaving so soon?" Please, have a taste of some spine-chilling terror before you go," he said mockingly before he swung the blade, sending the red blast streaking towards the spider Hanyu. Naraku placed Sounga in front of him and strengthened his barrier as he sped up his accent. The barrier threatened to break again before he finally escaped the blonde's range. Naruto watched the Hanyu leave with his proverbial tail between his legs, the remainder of his broken army following shortly after. He sighed once before an ear-piercing squeal nearly busted his eardrums while simultaneously giving him a heart attack. He turned and barely managed to catch the bundle of energy known as Rin as she glomped him, nearly toppling him over in the process. Narudisamarin Savarithinja main stopid theperplethinges and then hesantinothoronian thanayadid theaterthing with this word thatmad. She was stopped by Naruto gently placing a finger over her lips as he blinked rapidly trying to get the ringing out of his ears. He could only mutter a simple "Thank you Rin, for that incredible description." God, how he tried not to sound too sarcastic. He was rewarded by further ear damage and suffocation as the child squealed and hugged even tighter, making the blonde go slightly blue. "Rin, air," he gasped. "Rin," came the deep baritone of one Teokai. The young child stiffened as she continued to deprive him of much-needed oxygen and slowly turned her head to where she had heard the voice, finding the white-clad form of the Western Lord. Clothes slightly burnt and disheveled, but nonetheless, still him. She didn't even notice Naruto begin to turn purple as he began to try and pry her arms off, but with no such luck. Even his vision was beginning to turn dark around the edges. What the hell kind of chakra does she have? This is ridiculous. I can't believe I'm about to die from a hug, this sucks. Finally he could breathe again as Rin squealed her high-pitched squeal again and clambered off him. He took in the very necessary oxygen watching as the child ran to the Western Lord. He would have to thank the Teokai for his timely arrival. "Sesomaru-sama," Rin squealed. Sesomaru expected her to simply do what she always did, hug his leg. But to his surprise he saw the muscles in her legs coil back before she gave a leap worthy of a grasshopper demon as she practically lunged at him. He tossed Tenseiga from his right hand to his left and caught the child in his, now unoccupied right arm, letting her hug his neck. "Sesomaru-sama, I missed you," she yelled exuberantly, making him bite back a wince. His hearing was quite sensitive after all. "Rin, are you well?" he asked as he kneeled to set her down. She released him from her grip, making Naruto twitch in irritation. He had never seen a purple Inu before, that was probably his best chance. She nodded enthusiastically. Yes, Naruto-sama took good care of Rin. She suddenly pouted and Sesomaru bit back a groan. He could smell the salt of her incoming tears now. Why did Sesomaru-sama leave Rin? He rolled the words along his tongue for a bit before he spoke. "I was, in a place where you could not go," he stated simply. Her pout suddenly turned into a smile. "Okay," she chirped. Sesomaru raised an eye at the girl's rapidly changing moods. Naruto smiled at the interaction between the demon lord and young girl. He turned at the sound of footsteps and found Kagome walking over to him, tears falling from her eyes and trailing down her pale cheeks. "Naruto?" she questioned again. His familiar smile adorned his features as he separated and sheathed his swords as he walked over to her. "Hey Kagome, it's been a while," he said as he smiled before he let his eyes travel to the unconscious Kitsune in her arms. Kagome followed his gaze. Sadness replaced her joy at her reunion with her friend. "Shippu?" Naruto questioned. At Kagome's nod he placed a hand over the wounded Kitsune. "Don't worry, he'll be fine." She smiled and nodded optimistically. Kikyo grunted as she set Inuyasha down on the forest floor. She had heard distant rumbles and harsh gusts of wind hit her frame, nearly making her fall with their intensity, but she had made it a very good distance away. Finally settling him down, she began to look for a way to extract the poison from his system. As she was looking, she didn't notice the presence behind her until the person's voice reached her ears. "Oh, little Miko, that technique is all wrong." Kikyo turned and found a scarlet-haired fox demoness approaching. She reached for her bow when the Kitsune waved her hand, freezing her in place. Kikyo tried to move, but no matter how hard she tried, her limbs just wouldn't move. It was as if all her muscles had just seized up. Kyubi walked over to the fallen Hanyu and smirked at his unseeing amber gaze. She placed an open palm in front of his mouth as Kikyo watched helplessly. Inuyasha began to convulse and shake violently as spasms racked his body. He appeased his mouth and his eyes, and the miasma began to leak out, the purple cloud of burning poison forming a ball in the palm of her hand. She smirked as she stood, dispelling the cloud of poison. Tell the Hanyu when he wakes up not to get killed again. Next time, I won't have to save him, she said before walking away. As soon as she was out of sight, Kikyo felt that she could move again. She began checking the Hanyu and sighed in relief when she found no tray of the poison in him. Lady Kagome, came Naraku's voice as he ran towards them, Sango, Kirara and Kagura following through the air. Each paused as they caught sight of the familiar masked figure. Naruto simply smiled and waved. Hiya! Getting out of their stupor, the three made their way over. As soon as Sango was off, Kirara transformed into her smaller self and bounded up Naruto's pants and onto his shoulder, mewing happily as she licked his cheek. Naruto laughed as he scratched under her chin. Been a while there, Kirara. He looked around and finally noticed something. I don't hear cursing, thrashing, or sounds of near destruction, so where's Inuyasha? He questioned. At Kagome's gasp, he knew something was wrong. Kikyo stiffened as she heard footsteps. This time, not waiting to grab her bow, she gripped it and turned. Notching an arrow, she waited for the figures to come into view. Finally, Kagome, Naraku, Sango, and Kagura appeared, followed closely by Naruto and Kirara, along with Rin and Sesshomaru, who had followed merely to see if this day marked his brother's death. Kagome knelt next to the fallen Hanyu and placed a hand to his forehead. But, he was poisoned. How'd you manage to get it all out so quickly? Kikyo shook her head. I didn't do this. A fox demoness came and extracted the poison from him. It was lost to all but Sesshomaru, but the only blonde of the group had suddenly tensed and was now trying to discreetly get a bit further away from the group. Sesshomaru sniffed the air and noticed that the ninja had the female kitsune scent all over him. This immediately caught the group's attention. Sango narrowed her eyes. Did she have long red hair, black armor, and red eyes? Kikyo looked surprised but slowly nodded. Naruto turned to leave but simply came face to face with the amber gaze of a yokai lord. He turned to go the other way when he faced a very irritated-looking wind mistress. I think, she drawled as she closed her fan with a snap, that you have some explaining to do, Uzumaki, a lot of explaining to do. Naruto laughed somewhat nervously. What makes you think I know anything? She walked forward, stuck a hand in his top pocket and pulled out a note. This smells a lot like that demoness, she explained before she opened the note and read. No matter what he says, he knows everything. Feel free to beat the answers out of him, she read out loud. Naruto blinked. When she put an arm around me during the battle, that bitch. Chapter 38, Secrets Revealed. Naruto's eye twitched dangerously as he promised himself to do something to that meddling kitsune female next time they crossed paths. He wasn't sure exactly what he could do, but damn it, he would figure something out. Ahem. The sound of Kagura clearing her throat to catch his attention brought him out of his musings of revenge. At everyone's glares that clearly said, "You had better start talking." He sighed. He supposed it had to happen eventually. He had hoped against hope that they wouldn't bring it up, but even without Kyubi he knew he had to face the Piper since Gamakichi had practically yelled it out to the world. Speaking of which, the Toad was probably pissed right now because he forgot to summon him so they could talk. Ah well, he'd summon him soon, he couldn't be that pissed. Meanwhile, in the summon realm, a giant orange toad was currently playing darts. His target was the picture of a fox head, and every time he threw a dart he would always mutter something along the lines of, "I'll fucking kill him." The blonde sighed and held up his hands in a placating gesture. Fine, I'll talk," he said. He then pointed to Inuyasha, but only after he wakes up. This isn't a story I'm repeating twice. The group nodded their consent. Sesshomaru looked like he was about to say something, but Naruto cut him off. And I would like to have a word with you in private, Sesshomaru-sama. The Teiokai paused before he slowly nodded at the blonde ninja. Naruto then turned and smiled to the group. Well then, why don't you all head back to the village now? I'll join you soon. They each seemed wary of leaving the blonde alone with the Teiokai, but knowing that he could handle himself and could get a big-ass frog to help him, they each nodded, placed Inuyasha and Shippu on Kirara's back and began making their way to the village. Naruto then looked to the child humming happily next to them as she picked flowers. Naruto blinked, seemingly waiting for her to realize that she too had to go with them. When she was seemingly content to pick her flowers and made absolutely no move to leave. Rin? He addressed her, causing her to look up and smile at him. Yes, Naruto-sama. He smiled, his eyes softening at her tone. Rin, I need to talk alone with Sesshomaru-sama, alone for a moment. Why don't you follow the others? She took a wary glance at the group. Sensing her unease, he smiled comfortingly. Don't worry, they're nice. As if needing extra reassurance, she looked to Sesomaru. The Teiokai, while not fond of the group, knew that they would treat her well. He nodded once. She smiled. Okay. She chirped before running after them. Kikyo, who was trailing behind the group, paused at the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned and caught sight of Rin. The young girl paused in her run. Kikyo smiled warmly at her. Hello, what is your name? She asked as she offered her hand. Rin smiled at her and took the offered hand. Rin is Rin. Rin ha. That's a nice name. Naruto watched the group leave before he turned back to Sesomaru. The Teiokai wore an expression of blankness. How surprising. He cleared his throat before spoke. Lord Sesomaru, I could beat around the bush all day with boring drabble, but I want for 2 reasons. The first is that I don't want to, and the second is that you'll probably get sick and tired of the pointless drabble and either demand for me to get to the point or lob my head off, which I prefer to have firmly on my shoulders. Thank you. Your point. Sesomaru interrupted, as he indeed did get tired of the humans babbling quite quickly. Naruto smirked. Simple. I would like to propose an alliance of sorts. At least until we defeat Naraku. Sesomaru didn't say anything for a moment. It appears human, that those blades of yours give you more than enough strength to defeat Naraku, even with Soanga at his side. He said with just a hint of anger seeping into his voice. The fact that this human, a human, was stronger than him was definitely an irritating notion. Naruto nodded. True, but still, Naraku will no doubt try something when we meet again. Inuyasha, well, can't really think straight in a situation where he or his allies are cornered. You on the other hand, can. Naruto said as he stroked the dog demon's ego. Probably the best way to get him to agree. Flattery will get you nowhere, human. Sesomaru said, shooting down that thought before it could even take flight. Naruto's shoulders sagged as he put on a disappointed expression. Mao, and I was sure that would work. He then looked at Sesomaru square in the eye. Still, it's basically the same deal. Naraku's demise would be much easier if you were there, and probably a lot quicker. After he's dead, we'll come to the village and do something, and you can go do whatever it is that you do. He finished. Sesomaru stared at him with those golden suns of amber, and Naruto held his gaze steadily. After several seconds, Sesomaru nodded. Very well. Naruto bowed respectfully. Thank you, Sesomaru-sama. He spoke formally before he straightened and walked past him, heading towards the village. Rin will remain with me, human, despite your fondness of her. Naruto stopped before he looked up to the sky and smiled. As long as she's happy. With those simple words he continued his walk, leaving the Western Lord to his own devices. Naruto walked to Kid's hut. He saw Rin run into the hut. He was still quite a ways away, so she didn't notice him. But when she entered the hut, a few seconds passed before he heard an ear-piercing scream. He rushed forward, appearing at the doorway in less than a second, just in time to see Rin grab Kirara, who was now in her smaller form, and hug the living crap out of her, screaming "kawaii" at the top of her lungs as Kirara seemed to be turning blue as she let out small mews of agony. Sango looked horrified, Miroku looked amused, as did Kagura. Kagome had a look of pity as she struggled to hold back her laughter. Even Kikyo had a look of mild amusement. Naruto blinked a few times before he let a slow chuckle escape his lips. He laughed again, and again. It grew louder, the rich deep baritone growing until it was loud guffaws of laughter as he wiped a stray tear. When he looked back at the group, many of them were looking at him with somewhat astonished eyes. What? He questioned. Kagome snapped out of her trance as she spoke. Well, it's just, that's the first time we've heard you laugh like that. It's nice. Naruto stopped, realizing that it had been quite a while since he had laughed like that. He smiled. It feels nice too. So Naruto. Kagome said, eyeing the blades on his back, what have you been up to? Naraku flew through the air within the safety of his barrier. His rage was so great he was practically frothing at the mouth. His anger was palpable as Soanga pulsed in his hand. He continued to fly until a great claw of red chakra appeared from out of nowhere and shattered his barrier like nothing, sending him careening down to the forest floor. He crashed. A great dust cloud was picked up from the impact. He recovered from his daze just as he felt something slam into his arm, pinning him down. He looked up into the red eyes of the fox demoness that had brought him the sword in the first place. He tried to call on Soanga's power, but the blade was strangely silent. unresponsive in the presence of this female. Now! He heard her growl. You're going to be a good little spider, Hanyu, and you'll do exactly as I say. He snarled and was about to attack when he saw a bundle in her arms. His blood went cold as she unfurled the silk blanket, revealing the baby to be none other than his heart. Kyubi's smile was positively evil as she finished her previous sentence. Right, parasite? It was hours later that Inuyasha groaned as he awoke from his slumber. The sound of numerous voices reached his ears, they seemed close. Oh, my head! The Hanyu growled. Awake, I see. That voice. He slowly opened his eyes and let them fall to the masked blonde sitting next to him, who was currently poking fire. It took the dog-eared Hanyu a moment to catch up with who was currently sitting next to him. When it finally did, he shot to his feet and pointed at him dramatically. What the hell are you doing here? Naruto blinked at the Hanyu before looking back to the fire, then back at him. I appear to be making tea. He replied simply as he gestured to the kettle hanging peacefully over the fire. Inuyasha looked to the kettle, then to Naruto. He was about to grab the ninja by the throat and shake him till he either explained all the weird shit about himself or until his brains fell out of his skull. Either would prove satisfying. Just as he was about to follow through with his brilliant course of action, two voices reached his ears that made his blood run cold and his heart skip several beats. Inuyasha! The Hanyu slowly turned and found Kikyo and Kagome in the same room, looking at him. Oh, shit. The tension, which had been in the room from the very beginning, seemed to thicken. Kagome and Kikyo had basically ignored each other throughout the entire day. They had each spoken to someone, of course, but never each other. Now, however, this encounter had just hit a very troublesome snag. Namely, Inuyasha. Before the awkward/tense silence could go on, Sesomaru, having heard Inuyasha's yell from the forest, parted the sackcloth door and entered, clearly sending a message to the blonde, which clearly read. I am sick and tired of waiting, human, start talking. Sesomaru-sama. Rin yelled out delightedly as she ran up to him and hugged his leg before she held up Kirara for him to look, probably giving the poor feline heart failure as the Teokai turned his eyes onto her. Look how pretty. Kirara could only let out a small mew as Sesomaru continued to stare. Ichin. His response was enough for Rin as she happily returned to her place between Kagome and Naruto. Oh, keep petting Kirara. Sesomaru then turned his gaze onto Naruto. The blonde sighed. Inuyasha, sit down. The Hanyu looked like he wanted to say something about Sesomaru's presence, but for once, realized that now was the time to hold his tongue and so, complied with the command. Naruto sighed and rubbed his head. Alright, I don't know where to begin, so I'll let you guys ask whatever you want and I'll answer. The first question came from Sesomaru. Who is the fox demoness and what is your connection to her? Well, I call her Kyubi, if that's her real name or just her title I don't know. Inuyasha heard Sesomaru's sharp intake of breath. It was too quiet for human ears but not for him, and realized that if Sesomaru of all people had any form of reaction to this Kyubi chick, it must have been a pretty big deal. As for my connection to her, I was her jailer. Sesomaru's eyes narrowed. Oh, he recognized that name all right. The greatest of the great beasts of myth. The most powerful being ever to walk the face of the earth. So much so that she was called the first living natural disaster. This human claimed to have been able to hold her back. The very thought was ludicrous. Still, this human had proven himself remarkably capable of doing the unexpected and so decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. That and his scent told him that he was telling the whole truth. But still, who is this Kyubi? I've never heard of any demon by that name, it didn't even exist in my family archives. Sango spoke up from her place in the room. Surprisingly, it was Sesomaru who answered. The Kyubi is a demon ancient even to demon years, none are truly sure if it ever really existed. But supposedly, her power could rival even the gods. Everyone was trying to wrap their minds around such a concept. The silence was broken by Inuyasha. And you say that you imprisoned her? He asked incredulously. Naruto smirked. I didn't imprison her, someone else did that, I was just the guard. They waited for him to elaborate when it was apparent he wasn't going to. Miroku spoke up. And how is it that you are nearly 5 millennia old? At that, Naruto's head turned to him with a, where the fuck did this come from look. Miroku raised his own eyebrow. When you fought Naraku with that big frog, he said it had been 4,500 years since you've spoken. Naruto got an oh look on his face. I've only lived for 18 years, but yes, it has been about that amount of time since we've spoken. Everyone held a look which either said, huh, or explain now. Naruto answered by reaching his hand over and grabbing the bottle of shards hanging from Kagome's neck. He held it up for everyone to see. It was thanks to these that I came here. He tossed the shards back to her as Kikyo asked her question. How so? The Shikon jewel is only 6 to 8 centuries old, not nearly as old as the time you claim to come from. He sighed and leaned back against the wall. You remember that I told you that I was the Kyuubi's jailer. At their nods he continued. Well, she was released, and when that happened, the demons in the Shikon jewel reacted to it, and were drawn to her like a moth to the flame. I found the jewel, and was then asked to come here. Why? Kagome asked. He looked to her. I was sent to help you and Kikyo. Help me and Kikyo? Kagome repeated confused. Naruto nodded. It was Midoriko. She was worried that the conflict within the two of you caused by Mr. Indecision here. He ignored the Hanyo's indignant but guilty grunt. Would cause you to make a selfish wish on the jewel. So I was sent to help you two face your demons and to help kill Naraku. There was silence after that. Again it was Sesshomaru who broke it. Why did you release the Kyuubi? Naruto turned to face him. What do you mean? You stated that the Nine Tails was your prisoner. What caused you to release her? Naruto closed his eyes as another voice spoke up for him. He died. The entire group looked to the doorway, believing that the person had spoken from outside the hut. As they each looked outside, the voice spoke again, this time coming from inside the hut. They each turned and found Kyuubi, sitting behind Naruto. Whose right eye was again twitching dangerously. She had her arms wrapped around him in a hug, with both legs wrapped around his waist as she stroked his masked cheek with the back of her hand. Isn't that right, Naruchan? If she wasn't an omnipotent kitsune that could wipe out half the island with a single swipe of her tails, he would have seriously considered doing some bodily harm to the kitsune. Almost as if sensing his thoughts, she smirked. Ah, are you angry about the little note? What are you doing here? He asked quickly, getting tired of her antics. She smirked. My, can't even let a beautiful demon have her fun. Well, since you're so eager. Slipped a hand in his back pouch, letting it linger there for just a little while longer than necessary, and took a kunai. She threw the knife to the wall, attaching a piece of paper to it, letting the knife stab itself into the wall, displaying a map of central Japan. A big red X stood out. That's where Naraku will be heading next. I suggest you get moving soon. It should take you about a day or two at the most. Hello, pretty lady. Rin ran over to the Kyuubi, immediately recognizing her as she plopped down next to her. Kyuubi smiled and ruffled her hair. Well, hello there, Rin, so good to see you again. Has Naruto taught you anything new? She nodded enthusiastically. Kyuubi nodded and caught the anger and worry in Sesshomaru's scent, repressed as it was. The others, now knowing of her true identity, were wary of her, as they should be. She then noticed the unconscious fox demon, nestled near the fire, bandages wrapped around his midsection. Ah! She said appraisingly as she let some of her chakra seep from her claws. It floated down towards the unconscious kidling. Kagome moved to step forward and grabbed Shippu when her whole body was paralyzed on the spot. Don't worry, girl. The kitsune spoke simply as her chakra reached the kidling. Shippu glowed for a brief moment before it faded. Finally the paralysis wore off. Kagome moved forward and checked the young fox, noticing that his wound was completely healed. What are you up to? Naruto cut in, knowing that she was setting them up for her games again. She ran her claws down his jawline and down to his neck as she rested her head on his shoulder. Ichen, you just need to trust me a little while longer, Naruto, just a while longer. That said, she vanished in a swirl of red chakra. He sighed and stood. Are there any other questions? As they each held their silence, he spoke. Good, you're all taking this rather well. Yeah, well, there are few things I won't believe at this point. Kagome muttered to herself. Naruto nodded in understanding. Good, but the night's not over yet. Inuyasha, Kagome, Kikyo, I think it's time we had a little talk. Hey, who the hell said you could order me around? Inuyasha barked. He grabbed the Hanyu by the ear roughly and even used a little chakra in his grip. I said so. Because this is a conversation the three of you should have had long ago. Everyone watched the three leave. Miroku, Sengo and even Kagura to a degree were dreading this more and more with each passing second. Sesshomaru watched his brother, the two Mikas and the strange human leave before he turned back to Rin. Rin. The little child scurried up to him. Yes, Sesshomaru-sama. The human, Naruto, he tutored you in his techniques? he asked curiously. She nodded happily and placed Kirara on her head, who sagged with relief at the return of oxygen. The little girl formed her hand seals happily as everyone watched in curiosity. Poof! 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 Everyone watched in mild amazement as 3 identical clones stood next to her. Minus Kirara perched on their heads. Sesomaru looked at both clones and passed his hand through one, dispelling it. His clones are solid, hers are not. Still, this is impressive for one her age. If he could continue tutoring her, then she could defend herself. While Sesomaru was confident in his ability to protect her, it never hurt to be safe. It was something to mull over for the future. Lurdrd Sesh Hamameru. Sesomaru refrained from groaning and slapping his head in annoyance. Why did he keep the kappa around again? Jaken-sama! Came Rin's enthusiastic yell, as both her and her clones turned and rushed the kappa yokai. Jaken screeched to a halt, his face growing pale, turning it from a sickly dark green to a light lime green as he saw not 1, not 2 but 3 little balls of evil coming towards him. He fainted dead on the spot. Rin stopped and looked down at Jaken's still form. Jaken-sama? She questioned as she took out a stick and began poking him. Naruto released Inuyasha's ear once they were a good distance away from the village. Inuyasha growled but stopped when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and found both priestesses emerging from the forest. He looked to the floor, his ears folded against his head as he shuffled nervously from foot to foot. Naruto leaned against a tree, choosing to wait for this to play out. Time to make a choice. Inuyasha. Chapter 39, Farewell. A tense, oppressive, almost crushing silence hung heavy in the air around the tree as Naruto watched from his place off to the side. Inuyasha's aura, normally brash, loud and untamable, was now subdued to a degree which was almost disturbing. His little doggy ears were pressed flat against his skull and he wouldn't dare meet the eyes of either woman. The air around Kikyo was seemingly as calm and aloof as ever. However, if one looked closely, one could clearly see the small signs of her growing unease and anxiety. Kagome did not share her counterpart's countenance. Anyone with eyes could tell she was nervous. The silence, that damnable silence, could probably suffocate a person if they allowed it to, stretched on for almost an entire 10 minutes. It seemed like seconds to the 3 currently on the spotlight. Inuyasha would occasionally turn his head, almost as if he was contemplating running away. But then caught sight of Naruto's piercing blue eyes. The message was silent but still clear. Not this time, Inuyasha. Finally, the silence was broken by a small sigh. It took a moment for them to realize it had come from Kagome. The young girl sported a small sad smile, and though her eye glistened with held-back tears, they also showed resignation and acceptance. Kagome. Inuyasha knew what she was going to say, but he didn't want her to. If he could, he would keep them both. Both women were important to him. Kikyo was his first love, and Kagome was the woman he had grown to love. He didn't want to lose either one of them. Perhaps, no, he was selfish in that respect. Don't. It's okay, really. You love her. Kagome looked back at him sadly and gave him a weak smile. Anyone with eyes could tell that she was struggling with herself. Naruto had to admire her selflessness as she turned to leave. Kikyo too watched the younger girl as she took a deep breath, turned, squared her shoulders and began leaving with her head held high. It was then, at that moment, that she realized that this girl loved Inuyasha more than any other, even her. It was because she was leaving. She has the strength to let go, the strength to forgive Inuyasha and her for all of their past misgivings against her. Whether it be the times she had threatened her life, or the times Inuyasha had emotionally hurt her. She was still granting them both her blessing despite yet another suffering they were causing her. Kag! Inuyasha began, but stopped as he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned and saw Naruto somberly shaking his head. Their eyes met and Naruto relayed a silent message to him. Don't make this any harder for her than what it has to be. Finally, Kagome's small form vanished into the shadows of the trees. Inuyasha watched her leave, his expression torn. One could practically feel the Hanyo's skull cracking with the effort to keep his sanity intact in the face of this very stressful situation. Naruto sighed. It was a sad situation for all 3 of them. He then paused and turned to look at the deceased priestess. She also looked torn. After a second or two he realized why and smiled. Inuyasha. The dead priestess spoke, drawing the Hanyo's attention. His expression shifted from torn to a slightly softer look. Kikyo sighed tiredly before she gestured to the area Kagome had disappeared to. Go. she said in a curt voice, her expression blank, yet for those who could look well there was an underlying sadness in her eyes. Inuyasha immediately looked taken aback, as well as a little hurt. "Kikyo?" he questioned. She sighed and gave a sad smile of her own. "Go to her, Inuyasha, she has your heart now." "But no." She interrupted him. "You do love me, but not in that way, not anymore." She spoke in a calm tone, though Naruto noticed that there was a slight waver in her voice. "Kikyo, Inuyasha began again but was silenced as she stepped forward. She stood in front of him. She gently raised a hand and placed it above his chest. "Inuyasha, our love was a short one brought to an abrupt end, but that is the key in that analogy, our love ended that day." He moved to protect but again she cut him off. Naruto smiled somewhat at that. Indeed, things always went much more smoothly when Inuyasha would just shut up and listen to the truth. Kikyo took a deep breath. "I regret my actions towards you since then, but I want you to know that I never once regretted anything that transpired between us during those happy times. My heart will always be yours, Inuyasha." She finished as she looked away, momentarily losing her composure as a single tear trailed down her cheek. Inuyasha looked down to the floor, his ears flattened against his head. This time, he made no move to object. Instead, he moved forward, and gently, yet firmly embraced her. "Kikyo," he whispered as a tear trails down his own cheek. He knew that this wasn't just her letting him pursue Kagome. This was a goodbye. Once he left, so would she. Finally, after almost a minute they broke the hug. Inuyasha slowly stepped back, and in a single leap, bounded up to the tree tops after Kagome. All was silent in the clearing for a while before Naruto spoke. "That was quite brave of you, Kikyo." She took a deep breath as she nodded slowly. "They deserve each other. She can make him happy, even more than what I ever could." Naruto nodded before he walked forward, so that he was in front of her, his left shoulder in front of her chin. "For what it's worth, it was an honor to have met you, Kikyo." She nodded and turned to look at his eyes. "The honor was mine." "Uzumaki Naruto." The sound of metal piercing flesh practically echoed through the clearing. Kikyo gasped in pain as she clutched her new injury made by the kunai blade in his hand. Her flesh was turning to ash as the souls contained in her clay body began leaving. This time, she did nothing to stop them. As she began to fall back, Naruto gently caught her and lowered her to the ground. Kneeling beside her prone form, he held one hand under her head and another under her back, keeping her somewhat upright. She looked up into his eyes as her breathing became more and more shallow, her body weakening by the second as the souls left her. She looked up to his gentle gaze, finding some comfort in them. "Thank you," she whispered tiredly. "You helped me overcome my own demons." "Sure," he said, closing his eyes. "You don't have to thank me, I did what any other would do." She shook her head, as her eyes glazed over. "I never realized it before, but death is so peaceful." She whispered the last part as her head fell to the side shortly before it slowly dissolved into ash, the last of the souls finally leaving to their final resting place as the ash slipped through his fingers to be carried by the wind. He sighed, before he wiped his eyes and stood. He looked to where Inuyasha had left and smiled somberly. This ending was somewhat bittersweet, but he supposed it was for the best. He was about to leave and head back when he remembered something. He promptly pivoted on his heel and left in the other direction. It was almost an hour later that Naruto came across a cliff face. He didn't even pause in his gait as he leapt over it, plummeting down to certain doom. Kuchiyos no Jutsu. In a massive plume of smoke a familiar orange toad appeared. It had a pipe and was currently reading a massive scroll. Gamakichi snapped his head up looking around before its eyes settled on Naruto, who had leapt down from his place on his head and was now standing at the edge of the cliff looking at him with his eyes crinkling up into a smile. Gamakik stared at the blonde for a good 20 seconds before he calmly rolled up the scroll, placed it down on the ground, then put out his pipe and placed that next to the scroll. Then he took a deep calming breath as he extended his massive tongue and wrapped it around a confused-looking Naruto and lifted him up so he was at eye level with the toad. Then Gamakichi proceeded to do two things. The first was shake Naruto as wildly as he could and the second was yell at the top of his powerful lungs. "You fucking asshole! It's been 2 months. 2 whole fucking months since you last summoned me, you dumb bastard. Who the fuck do you think you are? The entire summoning realm is in an uproar now that rumors of another summoner still being alive. Do you have any idea how much paperwork I've had to deal with? 6,856,298 papers. 6,856,298 papers. He practically screeched, waving his arms about wildly to emphasize his point. Why the fuck should I have to put up with this bullshit? Ha! Just because you decided to drag your corpsey ass out of the grave shouldn't mean I should have to deal with this, should it? Naruto weakly raised a single finger to answer him amidst the yelling and shaking. Well, but was immediately cut off by Gamakichi's enraged yell. Shut up! Don't you dare interrupt me when I'm ranting at you. Think I'm ranting to hear myself rant? Silence! Answer me! Naruto spoke this time as Gamakichi appeared to finally be finished. His argument to such anger and annoyance was a simple, "I'm sorry." He wasn't even sure. Gamakichi sighed before he set the blonde down. Naruto sat down so as to fight off the dizziness. Gamakichi too sat down, now being at eye level with Naruto. Start explaining now. Naruto sighed. Well, it all started when I met this woman called Midoriko, and so now, I find myself here, informing you why I'm here. Naruto finished his tale. Gamakichi nodded as he smoked from his pipe. I see, it appears you are still Konoha's most surprising ninja, bro. Naruto smiled sadly. As of now, I'm Konoha's only ninja. Gamakichi, realizing his mistake, quickly changed the subject. So, Kyubi, gave you those swords, eh? Naruto nodded and fingered the two blades on his back. What did you name them? The Toad Boss questioned. Naruto's reply was a simple raising of his eyebrow. Name? Of course. Kichi said, incredulous. Every demonic blade is unique, and so must be granted a unique name. It's tradition. Naruto looked pensive for a moment before he unsheathed the two blades and looked at them. Finally, after a lengthy silence, he smiled, a soft but warm smile. I've got it. Kichi leaned forward to listen better. I'll name these blades Irayaku no Hai, Will of Fire. Kichi smiled. That's a good name, bro, because as long as one Konoha ninja is alive, the Will of Fire can never die. Especially when that ninja is Uzumaki Naruto, their spirit lives on forever in you. Naruto smiled, and sheathed his newly named swords before he approached his summon. Thanks, Kichi. Kichi smirked as he held up a webbed hand in a high-five motion. Naruto chuckled, as he remembered the old days. Kichi had picked up on the gesture and would never fail to ask for a high-five even when the situation never even called for it. He raised his own hand and with a wet smack gave his high-five to his much larger summon. See ya, bro. The Toad Boss said before vanishing in a plume of smoke. Naruto smiled, but his smile soon dropped as a red glow appeared on the horizon. He felt chakra wash over him. Kyubi, it was in the same direction she mentioned Naraku was going to be. You're calling to me, aren't you, soon, Kyubi? You asked me to trust you, so, you have it, at least for now. Naraku scowled as he walked through an area he didn't recognize. Old buildings were completely consumed by the foliage. Massive trees surrounded the area, but for the life of him he could not recognize this architecture at all. Finally he caught sight of the red-haired demoness. She was sitting atop a massive ple of rubble. In her arms was the infant child that was his heart, asleep, most likely because of the demon woman's influence. What is this place you have summoned me to? This is the place of your final battle. She replied, smirking. Where are we? He questioned again. He would love to wring her neck, but alas he knew he could not, even less with the demonic blade Soanga unresponsive at his side. We are among some ancient ruins. She answered elusively. Ruins of what? Her smirk turned downright evil. An old village, named Konoha. Chapter 40, The Jewel completed. If one were to look up at the sky on this day in feudal Japan, they would be greeted by a fairly strange sight. A monk and a demon slayer were currently riding on the back of a horse-sized two-tailed cat. Next to them was a dog Hanyu and a Miko riding atop a large feather. A red-eyed wind demoness was also riding on a similar feather. Next to her was the tall and white-clad figure of the Western Lord as he flew on his yokai cloud, and last but not least was a blonde-haired ninja riding atop a two-headed dragon. Indeed, this was not your average group of travelers. Rin and Shippu had been left behind with Keed and Jaken, knowing that the children would most likely be more of a hindrance than any help. Naruto had left Rin with another small scroll on the henge technique to help the poor old woman and ugly green imp keep her occupied, while Sesomaru had instructed Jaken to help the kitsune transform back to his original self. Why the Teokai did it may have been out of pity. After all, who wouldn't pity Shippu after the affectionate, borderline homicidal Greeting little Rin had give the cute ball of fluffiness that he now was. Naruto was certain his spine would most likely not have a quick recovery. He smirked at that, poor Shippu. He let his eyes travel to Inuyasha and Kagome, his clawed fingers gently gripped hers. There was a mixture of emotions in them. One was anxiety for the upcoming battle, a small sadness due to the knowledge that Kikyo was now dead, but there was also an underlying feeling of contentment in both of them, which could be seen with a small gleam of their eyes. The group was currently traveling towards the destination Kyubi had pointed them towards. Sesomaru and Inuyasha were both somewhat skeptical, but seeing as it is the best lead that they had, the two followed with minimal fuss. The group were fast approaching a jagged cliff face. Just beyond that was the alleged location of Naraku's final hiding place, and hopefully his final resting place as well. When they were close to the mountainside, they rose straight up, Kirara and On's claws digging into the hard, jagged rock face as they stopped their forward momentum and then ran along the wall, keeping pace with the rest of the group. Finally, the group of 9 reached the top of the cliffs, only to see an awe-inspiring, yet equally grim sight, one which also caused Naruto's eyes to widen in something akin to horror. Before them lay the ruins of what was once a fairly large city. Naruto recognized it easily. There was no doubt that this had once been his home. Even after nearly 5 millennia, no vegetation had grown in the area, as if the site had been preserved. In the distance, the Hokage Tower, leaning dangerously to one side. Naruto's eyes narrowed, and his grip on On's reins increased until his knuckles were almost white. She asked him to trust her, and she leads him here. Back to this place. The group begins their descent. Naruto does not follow. Instead he looks off to the right, where he can see the worn, nearly unidentifiable faces of the 5 Hokage. On whined and craned one of its 2 heads to look at him, as if asking what was wrong. He narrowed his eyes and gritted his teeth, before he took a deep breath to calm down before he looked to the dragon. Never mind, let's keep moving. The dragon nodded and descended quickly in order to catch up with the others. They all touched down, each taking in their strange, frightening, yet somewhat beautiful surroundings. Sesomaru, who had sensed the human ninja's unease and rising anger when they entered the field. Now, the Miko asked the questions on all their minds. What is this place? She asked, looking around. He felt the human sense shift and spoke as he stepped off his cloud. I believe, the human knows. He stated calmly as he looked over his shoulder to Naruto, who was getting off of On. The blonde shot him a glare, the likes of which few had ever seen on his normally kind face. He walked over to the remains of a building and knelt as his feet brushed against something. He knelt and picked it up, the rusty remains of a forehead protector, identifiable due to its perfectly rectangular form, gripped in his fingers. This would be my village, he said slowly. A few small gasps were heard from Kagome and Sango. Inuyasha, Miroku, and Kagura looked surprised while Sesomaru as usual gave no outward expression to the information. Naruto. Sango spoke softly. She knew that this was a painful experience. She herself had felt the same thing when she had returned to her village. Though she realized it must be different for him. While she had returned to a village of former loved ones in order to rebuild and she had mentally prepared herself for it, he, judging by his expression, was not expecting this. Before anyone could say anything, he spoke. Split up, fan out and search the area, signal, if you find something. His tone was tense and hard. It was obvious to anyone that now was not the time to mess with him. His orders given, the blonde began walking towards the single lone tower in the distance. Reluctantly the rest of the group split up, Kirara, Miroku and Sango going to one side, Sesomaru and Kagura going one way, while Inuyasha and Kagome went another. On, not knowing who to follow, decided to just sit and wait to see which was the first person that signaled for help. It took only a few short minutes for the blonde to reach his destination. With a swift kick, the front doors to the Kage Tower were kicked open, the rotten wood and rusted hinges giving way easily as the door was practically blown to splinters. Without even sparing a glance to the rotting, decayed interior, he walked up the stairs, the wood groaning and creaking due to his weight. As he reached the last floor, he paused for a moment as he laid eyes on Shizen's old desk. He then walked past it, towards the wooden doors of the Kage office, carved from a tree, created by the first Hokage. And with another swift kick, they too were destroyed, revealing the Kage office. The desk in the room was also falling to pieces like most of the things in the tower. But the red leather chair behind it was good as new. You could have knocked Naruchan. A sultry voice spoke as he entered. The chair swiveled around, revealing the fox Demonis as she smirked at his furious eyes. She looked around in fine sadness. I tried to keep things as you left them, booed. She drawled, taking in the rotting, creaking wood before smirking. It didn't work perfectly as you can see. Before most could even hope to catch, the blonde had grabbed her by the throat, hauled her to her feet and slammed her against the wall. She grunted slightly, as the wood cracked and creaked from the impact. She then grinned and began chuckling softly to herself. You! He snarled as he tightened his grip. How dare you bring us here? He yelled as he reared back his free hand and aimed a fist to her face. She craned her head to the side, avoiding the fist which went straight through the wood. She then latched onto his wrist with one hand while her other hand locked around his own throat. Now Naru-chan, temper. She chided as she would a small child. She laughed again. Besides, you have bigger problems to worry about than simply being angry with me, she said as a dark shadow descended on the ruins of the village. He looked out the balcony, and then in the sky, saw thousands, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of demons of all kinds. There was a slight pause before she spoke. You had better hurry, Naru-chan, unless you want to lose all of your precious people again, she said, smirking. His pits of ice-cold fury turned onto her before he snarled and threw her off to the side. This isn't over, Kyubi. Her name rolled off his tongue with such hatred it was almost enough to make even a demon like her cringe, almost anyway. Instead, she smirked as she straightened. Oh, I'm counting on that, Naru-chan. With one final glare, the blonde turned and leapt out the balcony. When he was finally gone, the smile on the Kyubi's face dropped and she walked over to the ledge of the balcony. Her visage, blank, but a small sliver of worry could be seen in her eyes. She let a smirk again tug at her lips. Soon, Naruto, very soon. Midoriko observed the demons which constantly roamed just beyond her barrier before she took a deep breath and knelt down. Placing her hands in a praying position, she began her chant. Kyubi, ironic, that you, the greatest of demons, are the one that has offered me my freedom. I pray that you keep your end of the bargain, for this will take all of my strength. Kagome and Inuyasha watched the demons above them, with great trepidation. Kagome's notched arrow glowed, ready to be released, as Inuyasha unsheathed Tetsusaiga. Get behind me, Kagome, he said, placing his arm in front of her. She felt happy that he would protect her but had to sweat drop at the fact that they were surrounded, and that getting behind him left her just as exposed as being anywhere else. The two never noticed the jewel shards glowing and pulsing softly in the jar around Kagome's neck, at least until they shattered and flew towards the tower. The blonde Jinchuriki was running over some of the remaining rooftops of the village when a purple glow to his right caught his attention. He barely had time to twist his body enough to avoid the blast that shot past him. He crashed down on the floor on his back before he rolled to his feet. He looked towards his attacker, and found Naraku, Sounga pulsing in his grip. Naraku grinned evilly as he set eyes on the Jinchuriki. Ah, Negan, so good to see you here. Now I can kill you. Unless you forgot, Parasite, I kicked your sorry ass last time. Naraku's smile only widened. Ah, yes, but last time, I did not have. He paused as he raised his hand holding a near-complete, almost completely black, jewel. This. Then, the remaining shards, these, pink indicating purification, shot straight past the blonde, and with a blinding light, merged with the remainder of the jewel. Naruto covered his eyes, protecting them from the light. When he opened them again, a small gasp escaped his lips. In Naraku's hand was the very complete, and very tainted jewel of 4 souls. Naruto moved to take the jewel away, but with a deafening roar Naraku slammed the jewel into his chest. Naruto crossed his arms to shield himself from the fierce shockwave. He leapt back to avoid the poisonous Yuki. With grim, yet determined eyes he unsheathed his 2 blades. With a resounding snap, the 2 blades were joined and the blonde took up his stance, as the demons circling above the ruined village, descended. As the blonde watched the light die down, the blonde promised himself one single thing. Not again. Chapter 41, A New Beginning. Naruto's chakra fared wildly, as red chakra pulsed from the blade in his grip. He spun the staff blade once over his head before he swung it in a wide arc in front of him. The red blast of power was blinding as it tore everything apart in its path toward the spider Hanyu. To Naruto's slight surprise, Naraku simply raised Sounga and with minimal effort erected a barrier that stopped the attack dead in its tracks. Now that the dust cleared, he could see Naraku for what he truly was. The spider demon's features had changed, his mandible had turned into a similar one as a spider's, but when he closed it his features appeared very normal if only for a single line that went from his bottom lip down to his chin. Think of the vampires in Blade 2, his eyes were completely red along with 8 horns sticking out of his head, forming something akin to a crown, which framed his black hair almost perfectly. 4 bony protrusions extended from his back, showing his spider demon blood to the world. As soon as the attack died down, Naraku swung his own blade at the blonde ninja with a loud cry of Gokuryuha. The yoki around Soanga surged before the ground before the spider demon seemed to explode as purple dragons rose up and headed for the blonde Jinchuriki. Naruto raised his own blade, forming a blue barrier around him. The attack hit and broke like water on rock as it moved past him and destroyed the earth behind him, leaving 2 jagged trenches to either side of him. As the attack died down, Naruto shot forward, his sword flashing as he swung. The clash of metal against metal was loud in his ears as their blades met. He spun around, moving to slash at Naraku's feet with the other end of his staff blade but was met instead by one of the bony legs that came from his back. Naruto's eyes narrowed, those things were harder than steel. He sidestepped as the other 3 legs moved to impale him, instead crashing to the floor. He appeared at the spider's side. He moved to impale him, but Naraku managed to move Soanga in time to block the attack. Naruto leaned back to avoid a swipe from one of Naraku's new legs as the spider demon turned to face him, but couldn't move quick enough and received a slash across his chest. Naraku chuckled but stopped as he noticed a bright glow coming from the Jinchuriki's free hand. Rasengan! Naruto yelled, slamming the ball of chakra into the spider demon's chest, sending him flying back, crashing into one of the ruined buildings. The blonde barely had time to take up his stance before Naraku's form exploded from the ruined building heading straight for him, Soanga trailing behind him. Naruto placed his staff sword vertically in front of him, blocking Naraku's swing with another resounding clang dash. Naraku snarled before he extended another of his legs and stabbed the blonde in the left shoulder, going completely through. Naruto gritted his teeth to keep from screaming as Naraku lifted him up, over him and slammed him down to the dirt hard. Naruto couldn't regain his wits before Naraku dragged him across the ground, using the bony appendage still lodged into his shoulder and slammed him against a crumbling stone wall, destroying it entirely. Naruto snarled as he felt his sword fall from his grip, tumbling on the floor with dull clatters. Naruto gripped the bony appendage in his left shoulder with his left hand and then with a strong quick punch using his right fist snapped it in 2. Naraku grunted in pain. Naruto rolled with his current momentum, got to his feet and lunged at the parasite. Naraku, caught off guard by the blonde's fast recovery, couldn't react before Naruto appeared, kneeling down in front of him, pulled out the broken appendage from his shoulder with a savage jerk, and stabbed it right through Naraku's left kneecap. Naraku screamed and would have collapsed had it not been for his new legs, 2 of which he used to hold himself upright. Naraku raised Soanga and brought it down, the purple, malevolent energy cackling wildly before a blast went off in Naruto's face point-blank range. Naraku grinned, certain of his victory when a flash of red broke through the purple stream of energy. He couldn't pull back before red overtook purple, exploding in a shower of yuki and chakra, destroying most of his body, only his right arm holding Soanga, half of his left arm, and 2 out of 4 of the bony legs on his back remained. He snarled as he was thrown back, as the dust cleared it revealed Naruto holding Iroku no Hai in front of him. The blonde barely had time to bring the weapon to himself using a modified replacement technique, replacing the sword with a stone at his side. Naruto stood slowly, wincing at the pain in his rapidly healing shoulder. Naraku chuckled, and in a second, miasma gathered and his entire body regenerated out of thin air, leaving not a single injury. Naruto's eyes widened, he didn't even seem remotely tired. You seem frightened, Uzumaki Naruto. The spider demon laughed coldly as Naruto narrowed his eyes. Now you see the difference between us. You can never hope to stand against me now that I hold the full power of the Shikon jewel. His yuki flared, going nearly 12 feet high. Naruto watched as the foul energy ate away at the small patches of grass that peeked through the dirt, as well as the old wood and stones of the ancient ruins around them. And it was still growing. Naruto had to shield himself as a shockwave nearly sent him tumbling back from the sheer force of it. He looked up to Naraku's smirking form again. He blinked, and he was gone. Naruto barely had time to gasp before he felt a searing pain in his stomach. He gasped, coughing and choking on blood which pooled in his face mask. He looked down, and found Soanga's tip poking out of his stomach before it was savagely yanked out. He nearly fell to his knees but managed to hold himself up, using his staff sword. He heard Naraku's sinister chuckle behind him as the spider demon walked in front of him. So pathetic. He sneered before he kicked the blonde in the chest, sending him flying back until he hit another of the crumbling walls going straight through it. Naraku chuckled again as he stepped forward, sneering down at Naruto's bleeding form. The wound in his stomach was healing, but not fast enough. "Now I'll kill you," he spoke with a satisfied grin. Naruto narrowed his eyes in anger. They flashed purple with a slit through them as Iroku no Hai pulsed once. He grinned, certain of his victory when he felt a searing pain in his own stomach. He looked down and found one tip of Naruto's staff blade protruding from his stomach this time. "I think not." He heard the blonde's chilling voice behind him. He craned his head to look over his shoulder where he met the blonde's cold eyes with his own. "Wind scar," came Inuyasha's cry as he destroyed another group of demons. However, they all seemed insignificant in the face of this never-ending horde. Behind him, Kagome fired arrow after arrow. Luckily, she had brought nearly 4 full quivers of arrows, so she was in no danger of running out anytime soon. Her arrows took down nearly a dozen with each shot, but as stated before, these numbers were insignificant. The demon horde was slowly wearing them down. If they didn't meet up with the others soon, they would be overwhelmed. "Inuyasha!" Kagome called to him. "We have to find Miroku and Sango." Inuyasha slashed at another demon with his sword as he tore another apart with his claws. He looked back at her and nodded. He leapt back, wrapped his arm around her waist and leapt through the demon horde as he tried to sniff out Miroku and Sango, slashing at the demons in his path with the Tetsusaiga gripped in his free hand as Kagome shot the ones behind them with her arrows. The roars, growls and snarls of the demons all around them spoke of madness and bloodlust. Inuyasha launched another wind scar where he managed to catch a brief glimpse of Sango atop Kirara as she swung Hirekatsu through the air. "Hang on," he commanded the girl in his arm. She nodded and gripped him tighter as he tore through the demon scum around him, heading for the demon slayer atop the fire Nico. Meanwhile, clear across the ruined village of Teiokai, along with a wind which were not having a good time as they hacked low-level fodder to pieces. Sesomaru raised his blade and with all the poise and grace a 500-year-old lord of the west could possess brought Tenseiga down in an arc, tearing open a gateway to the underworld where the demons were promptly sucked in as Kagura sent wind blades that sliced them to ribbons. She snapped her head behind her as one of the demons got past her guard. Its jaws appeared, ready to bite down on the junction of her neck and shoulder when he was suddenly caught and promptly turned to green gunk by a stoic demon lord. "We must go," he spoke as he wrapped an arm around her waist, catching her completely off guard, actually managing to elicit a squeak from the Kazi before Sesomaru used his demonic speed to vanish from their previous location. Kagura felt her stomach drop as the whole world whipped past her at blinding speeds. The faces of the 1,000 demons or so nothing but blurs. When they finally came to a stop, she had to fight off the feeling of vertigo as Sesomaru sent his acid whip to another group of demons, slicing them all apart. "Gather your wits, Demonis," he snarled as he slashed at another group of demons. Kagura snapped her attention back to the battle at hand and snapped her fan open before she let her wind blades fly to the area behind the demon lord. Just then a huge shockwave of Yuki reached their senses, causing both of them to stiffen. It was by far the largest they had ever felt. Sesomaru narrowed his eyes. "You go and find your companions, I will go to find the human, Naruto." Kagura nodded, before she formed her feather beneath her and soared above the yokai, intent on finding Inuyasha and the others as Sesomaru began cutting his way towards where he had felt the pulse of Yuki. Naraku snarled as he received yet another gash across his chest. He didn't know what was happening, but somehow the blonde was moving faster than anything he had ever seen. He could only catch the briefest of blurs before another injury appeared. If it hadn't been for his, now near godly regenerative powers, he would have already died several times over. The blonde had nearly cut off his head 3 times, and plunged several of those Rasengan things into his chest, back and stomach. If his heart was still in his body he would have certainly died. Naruto meanwhile was starting to feel the strain of this new technique. Apparently, the third power of his sword did 2 things. It increased his speed to almost unimaginable levels, and increased his reflexes so he could keep up with his own movements. But, this power was coming at a heavy price. His chakra was draining, and Naraku's Yuki still hadn't wavered in its potency, meaning he wasn't weakening. He would be out of chakra long before Naraku was. "Damn it!" he snarled angrily as he stopped in his run. Naraku, catching sight of the blonde, raised his sword and sent another Gokuryuha towards him, only to have Naruto appear right next to him, sword already raised as red chakra cackled around it. "Kitsune go ka, Omi no ho!" he screamed as he brought the blade down, sending the most powerful blast of red yuki he had ever made straight at the demon from barely 2 feet away. Naraku placed Sougna in front of him and tried to ward off the attack, but soon it became too much. The spider demon struggled to stand as the attack finally died down, revealing his broken, mangled body, which was quickly regenerating. He struggled to stand, but a sudden fierce gust of wind nearly knocked him back down. When he looked to the source, he felt his eyes go wide with fear. Naruto, standing amidst the ruins of his old village, gripped his blade firmly in his left hand, its form cackling with red and blue chakra. In the other, glowing with power, was a fully formed Rasengan. Its form quickly gaining 4 bladed extensions, marking its evolution to the most powerful ninjutsu ever created, the Futon Rasen Shuriken. His eyes, however, struck the most fear into him. They held a determination, promise, that he would not stop, that he would not ever back down until one, or both were dead on this field of battle. The spider demon snarled as he straightened, pushing down his fear. He would never fear this human again, not now, not when he had the power of the Shikon jewel. He smirked. "Boy, I will take a great deal of pleasure when I kill you." He sneered before he smiled again. "As a matter of fact, I think I won't kill you. No, I'll keep you alive, so you can watch as I destroy everything you hold precious." As soon as the words left his mouth, he knew it was the wrong thing to say. The boy's chakra flared, its pale blue light was like a roaring fire in the night as it illuminated everything. The low-level demons were drawn to this light, like moths to the flame as they approached cautiously. Naruto suddenly threw down his blade, surprising Naraku a great deal. He then formed a single seal with his now free hand. Initial Gate Ki. Naraku watched as his chakra flared even higher. He was fairly certain it could be seen for several hundred yards. He formed another single-handed seal. Heal Gate Ki. Naraku watched in wide-eyed amazement and terror as all of the boy's injuries healed in a second. Life Gate Ki. His skin turned red and his chakra flared again. The Rasengan in his hand pulsed, and grew several inches in diameter. His pupils vanished, turning his eyes completely white. Wound Gate Ki. By now his chakra was flaring around so wildly his face mask had been completely blown off. Limit Gate Ki. Kyubi, who was watching the proceedings from a distance away, could only smirk. "That's it, Naruto, just a little more." The demons that had been closing in around him at this point were completely blown away. Naraku himself barely managed to keep his feet as the chakra pushed him back several feet. Naruto then gripped his wrist. The wind Rasengan pulsed wildly as he pushed more chakra into it, pushing his control of the technique to its very limits as the wind picked up in its ferocity and the earth shook beneath his feet, the loose cloth of his headband whipping behind him as if caught in an upwards wind. Naraku shot forward with all the speed he could muster, intent on stopping the blonde before he completed his technique. "Go Kuryoha," he yelled, sending the blast ahead of him. Naruto's eyes snapped open, the red of his iris breaking through the white formed by unlocking the third gate. He gripped his blade and vanished before the blast reached him, appearing in front of Naraku again. Futon Rasen Shuriken. He roared, slamming the attack dead center into Naraku's chest. Inuyasha snarled as a demon bit into his shoulder. He ripped the disgusting thing over his shoulder and stabbed it on the ground before he spun around again. "Wind Scar!" he yelled, sending the yellow streaks of energy into the mass of roaring demons. "Inuyasha!" Sango yelled down to the Hanyu. "That blue light! What do you think it is?" she yelled again as she threw the Hirekatsu again. "What the hell do you think?" Kagura yelled as she sent another volley of wind blades. "It isn't Sesomaru and it isn't Naraku. Who else could it possibly be?" The entire group exchanged worried glances as they each came to the same conclusion. "Naruto. Well, come on, we gotta go help the moron." Inuyasha yelled as he cut another demon down. "No, you idiot!" Kagura yelled. "We need to find the kid, Naraku's heart. If we find him we can kill him easily. Did you even look at this place, bitch? We'll be looking forever in these damn ruins." He snarled back. "Whatever we're gonna do, we have to do it now." Kagome cut in as she launched another arrow. Inuyasha struggled with himself for a moment before he finally spoke. "Alright, you guys, look for the brat." I'm afraid that won't be necessary." A voice cut him off as a blast of red chakra destroyed all the demons around them in an instant. They each looked up to the top of a ruined building and found the Kyubi sitting there with a smug smirk on her face as one leg dangled over the edge. In her left hand Naraku's heart was nestled safely. The entire group tensed, knowing that this was one demon they stood absolutely no chance against. Inuyasha, however, would not back down without at least some of his fight showing through. "Give us the kid now, lady. Or do you want me to cut you down with him?" he snarled. Kagura brandished her fan. This was her revenge staring at her. Just a simple wind blade and she would enjoy the satisfaction of seeing Naraku dead. Kyubi chuckled. My what bravado, no child, you see, I cannot have Naraku die until he's fulfilled his purpose. So therefore, this child remains with me. Everyone tensed, but before they could say anything, boom! The entire group was blown clear off their feet as a massive explosion erupted behind them, from where they had seen the blue light. It was huge, dome-shaped and had to be at least 100 feet high. The air seemed to be sucked right into it, as if it was a black hole, or tornado. It was like a vacuum. The demons were all sucked into a swirling vortex, shredding them to pieces before it all exploded outwards in a great shockwave that shook the earth with its raw power, disintegrating any remains. I suggest. Kyubi drawled as she watched the dazzling sight. You all go help Naruto before he bites off more than he can chew. The group each exchanged looks and decided to take the kitsune's advice and rushed over to the scene, missing Kyubi's smug smirk. Midoriko groaned in pain as the demons continued to pound away at her barrier. Sweat was visible on her brow as she bit her lip in concentration. She felt a hand on her shoulder and looked up, finding the, for once serious expression, of the Kyubi no Kitsune standing before her. It's time, Midoriko. The demoness spoke quietly. Midoriko gave a small nod and her barrier finally fell, allowing the demons to take control of the Shikon jewel. Kyubi kneeled down and wrapped her arms and tails around the legendary priestess. Don't worry. She spoke as a small red barrier formed around them, blocking the demons out from devouring the priestess. In the center of the devastation stood Naruto. His entire arm had severe slashes all over it, caused by his own wind blades, as well as the fact that it was broken in nearly 5 places. The area in front of him was much worse than he was. Everything had been cut to pieces, a massive crater spread out in front of him. Chunks of demonic remains were littered all over the place along with their blood. Naruto sighed in something akin to relief. The demonic horde above them began to disperse and Naraku was nowhere to be seen. He felt around for his Yuki, but after several seconds that he couldn't even detect a faint wisp of his Yuki, he sighed in relief. Naraku was dead. He heard footsteps behind him and turned, finding Sesomaru standing there with his usual stoic look, though one could tell he was impressed. Hell, if you weren't impressed by a 100-foot crater you had some serious problems. Sesomaru then looked to the right. Naruto followed his gaze and found the rest of the Inutaichi approaching them. He smirked as he sat down, wincing slightly at the pain of his arm as his chakra finally died down. The rest of the group soon reached them, as they each took in the scene and Naruto's relaxed position, as well as the fact that they couldn't feel Naraku's foul presence anywhere near them, came to a hopeful conclusion. Naraku's dead? Kagome questioned for everyone. Sesomaru nodded. Apparently so. It took a moment for the words to sink in. But when they did, cheers of delight were let out by nearly the whole group. Kagome practically tackled Inuyasha to the ground where she hugged him fiercely, tears of joy streaming down her eyes. Miroku uncovered his hand and found the wind tunnel to be rapidly closing. At that sight, Sango wrapped him in a fierce hug and to the monk's great delight and surprise, kissed him square in the lips. Kagura smiled, a smile which was almost radiant in itself. Naruto smiled as well. Seeing their faces in such unbridled delight, he wondered if this is what it would have been like had they won the war against Oto and Akatsuki in Konoha. He stood shakily, using his sword for support. "Ha, I guess we won," he stated with a small smile of his own, catching everyone's attention as they all gaped. "Na Naruto." He looked momentarily confused before he realized the reason for their shock. His mask was gone. They could all see his face rather clearly. He simply grinned in response, showing off his enlarged canines. "Well now, I suppose, wearing my mask around you is somewhat pointless, eh?" The group smirked somewhat, but their smirk soon died as the earth began to shake beneath them and the clouds turned purple again. Miroku looked at his hand and saw to his horror the wind tunnel opening again. He quickly rewrapped the prayer beads on his arm to seal it away. The entire group tensed and drew their weapons. From the crater Naruto recently made, a dark cloud of miasma slowly rose. Naruto turned, holding his staff sword in his left hand as his right was still badly torn up. The entire group faced the growing cloud of miasma, their weapons ready to attack. However, before anyone could react, tentacles sprouted out from the ground behind. "Naruto! Naruto! Look out!" The blonde turned at the warning but barely managed to catch a glimpse of the incoming attack before they hit. One piercing his right shoulder, another from his left hip, two from his chest area and another pierced his left arm around the elbow joint, nearly taking his entire arm off. "Naruto!" was the cry that faintly reached his ears as his eyes dulled and he coughed up blood. Another tentacle wrapped around his throat and with a casual flick threw him over the group so he landed several yards away with a dull thud. His blood quickly pooling around him. Some in the group moved to aid him when the sinister, sickly chuckle reached their ears. They turned and saw the miasma as it materialized, revealing Naraku, completely unscathed as his yuki swirled around him. "Now that the nuisance is out of the way, it's time that I have my fun." He chuckled before thousands of fleshy tentacles sprouted from the ground around the Inutaichi. Naruto coughed, letting the metallic, coppery taste of his blood fill his mouth, nearly choking on it. His breathing was becoming heavier as his vision darkened. He let his head fall to the side and saw the group as they fought Naraku. His eyes dulled before he felt his head being lifted, then gently dropped down onto something soft. He weakly looks up and sees Kyubi's red eyes staring back. He was resting on her lap, as she ran a hand lazily though his blonde hair he sees, concern, in her eyes. He feels her place something in his hand, and he recognizes it as Iroku no Hai's hilt. She leans down, and whispers in his ear. "Naruto, listen to me, you need to unlock the final power." She speaks calmly as her yuki works on keeping him alive. "I can't." He rasps out, "If you don't, then they will die," she says fiercely. His eyes widen as his breathing quickens somewhat. She feels him grip the blade tighter. However, another coughing fit hits him, making him lose all of his strength as he fell back, his grip on the blade going slack. Kyubi could feel his life slipping away. She snarled before she picked him up by the scruff of his shit, getting him up to his full height, though she held him up, as his legs had no strength in them. "Enough!" she snarled. "Are you so weak that you would fail twice? You would let your precious people die twice? You are a disgrace to the memory of the Leaf Village." She saw his eyes open as he gritted his teeth in anger. "You are nothing but a weak boy, Naruto," she snarled, watching as his grip on the sword tightened again. "Have you forgotten your promise, Naruto?" "Silence. Have you forgotten your promise, Naruto?" she asked again, a bit more forcefully that time. Again silence. "Have you forgotten?" she yelled that time, watching as the boy's eyes flashed red. "Live!" The blade in his hand pulsed. Naruto awoke to the familiar sensation of the wind whipping through his hair. "What the?" he questioned before a purple glow to his right caught his attention. He twisted himself out of the way and hit the ground. Getting to his feet quickly, he looked towards his attacker, and found Naraku, Soanga pulsing in his grip. Naraku grinned evilly as he set eyes on the Jinchuriki. "Ah, Negan, so good to see you here. Now I can kill you," he spoke smugly. Naruto then saw that he looked as he did before he absorbed the Shikon jewel. Naraku sneered at him. "So you choose to play the stoic? Well, little ninja, let's see how smug you are when you see what I have." He sneered as he raised his clawed hand, revealing a broken Shikon jewel. Everything seemed to snap in place for Naruto at that moment. The fourth skill is to go back in time. Just then the remaining fragments of the Shikon jewel shot past him, forming the complete jewel again. Naraku chuckled and went to place the jewel in his chest when his wrist was caught and held in place by a firm grip. He looked back, his surprised red eyes meeting Kyubi's smug ones. What is this? Simple, you've outlived your purpose. After all, you are only a pawn in this game, and the pawns must always be sacrificed for the king. She spoke as she showed the baby nestled in her arms. Naraku's eyes widened in fear before the woman's chakra flared, turning the baby into nothing but ash in just a few seconds. He gasped and gripped his chest as he coughed up blood. The sacred jewel fell from his grasp, forgotten as it rolled to Naruto's feet. Naruto looked up, and saw the demonic horde beginning to disperse as Naraku's hold on them vanished. The spider demon coughed as he collapsed on his knees. Kyubi walked to his side and with a casual flick of her pristine claws lobbed off the Hanyo's head, letting his body fall with a dull thud. Naruto looked over his shoulder where he could see the Inu group approaching. He looked to the Kyubi's serious expression and narrowed his eyes, kneeling down to pick up the jewel at his feet. Tell me now, why have you done this? What was your purpose?" Now before the others arrive, she looked up to the sky, a blank expression on her face. When you freed me from my imprisonment, I did as you asked. I destroyed the last Akatsuki members and then, I saved you. I kept you alive not out of some kindness of affection I had in my heart for you, but because I wanted you to suffer. I wanted to break you, and so I saved you, and left you alive amidst the ruins of your precious village. Then, I felt your presence vanish. I was certain you had committed suicide, but instead of the satisfaction I expected, instead I felt something I would later on recognize as guilt. At the time, however, I shrugged it off and simply chalked it up as the last of your human influence on me. And so I did what I always did after that. I destroyed everything. Any village ninja or otherwise that dared stand in my way was destroyed. Then, at the end, when the world was finally brought to its knees by the might of the 9 bijou, I looked back on my actions, as I always did, and felt regret, for the first time in all my millennia of life. I felt remorse for my actions. I was disgusted with myself. And so, I left. The other tailed demons found me to be weak, and so tried to usurp my power, leading up to the war that lasted nearly 2 millennia. The Bijou Wars, which finally broke the world and sent it into darkness. After that, I slept and I watched as the world rebuilt itself from the destruction that I caused. I was determined to rest for all eternity, and leave the world free from me when I felt it. She looked to him, then her eyes glinting with something he couldn't identify. You had returned. At first I wasn't sure, but, when I confirmed it, I wanted to make it up to you, I suppose, and this was the best way for me to do it. You wanted to make it up to me. By doing what? Manipulating me. Manipulating everyone to play your sick little game. As he spoke, his voice got louder and louder until he was right in front of her, his hand gripping her collar as he glared deep into her red eyes. She sighed and bowed her head. No, everything I have done has led up to this moment. In your hand, you now hold the complete Shikon jewel, and also, the blade I gave you. She locked gazes with him. Give me the jewel, Naruto. Give me the jewel and I can send you back. His breath hitched as his eyes widened. He released his grip on her out of pure surprise. Well, what did you say? Her features were still blank as she stared at him. I can send you back. If you give me the jewel, my power will escalate to the point where I can enhance the power of your sword's 4th technique. Enough to send you back to your home. Naruto seemed as if he had just been nailed in the side of the head with a sledgehammer as he stepped back as if in a daze. He suddenly felt very dizzy. You. His words were jumbled in his own mind. You can stop it, you can stop it all. You can save your friends, your family, you can have the life that was stolen from you. Why would you do this? He questioned again. She looked away. That doesn't matter. All you need to know is that I am doing it. Now, give me the jewel. He looked to the pearly white orb in his hand. It shined beautifully despite the taint that remained on it from Naraku's aura. To go back? Could he really go back and save them? Tsunade, Jiraiya, Irika, Konohamaru, Ino, Kakashi, Shino, Kiba, Hinata, Tenten, Niji, Lee, Kurenai, Gai, Shikamaru, Chuji, Udon, Moegi, Ebisu, Sakura. He could save them. He could have a second chance. Slowly, ever so slowly, his hand moved towards her outstretched one. The jewel's magic tingling her fingertips. Suddenly he paused, pulling back as he looked over his shoulder towards the group which was now rapidly approaching them. What will happen to them? The Kyuubi looked momentarily taken aback before she answered. They will cease to exist. History will be changed and they will most likely never be born. Naruto's eyes closed painfully as he looked at the jewel in his hands. Their footsteps were approaching now, he could hear them clearly. Naruto. Kyuubi spoke. You must decide now. She pressured, taking a step towards him. Naruto stiffened. To go back was something he had dreamed of doing since this had all begun. To just go back and correct his mistake. But to sacrifice this world, for his, was it right to do so? He glanced back again at the group who was now a mere 50 yards away. To simply wipe their lives away completely, to take them like that, could he do so? Kyuubi watched in shock and amazement as Naruto's hand slowly lowered to his side, letting it hang limply there. Naruto. He looked up at her then, his eyes crinkling up in a pain-filled smile as he let the jewel fall to the floor by his feet. No. He spoke softly. My mistakes in the past are my own. I have no right to destroy their lives simply for my selfishness. Her eyes were wide in disbelief and she numbly registered as he stepped forward and embraced her. He spoke, barely a whisper as it caressed her ear. Thank you, Kyuubi. He then vanished in a swirl of leaves, leaving a visibly baffled Kitsune, before a slow proud smile graced her lips. I thought I'd find you here. Naruto turned to the voice, finding none other than the notorious fox Demoness staring back at him, her customary smirk firmly in place. He currently sat atop the former Hokage monument, atop the fort's head to be exact. Old habits die hard, I suppose, he stated before looking onto the ruins of the village. She smirked as she walked next to him and sat down. Naruto turned to face her but was surprised as she pulled down his face mask, and again kissed him fiercely on the lips. She pulled back, her eyes closed as she smirked. You really are Konoha's most surprising ninja, aren't you? He sighed and smirked as well. I suppose so, he replied. He was surprised when she leaned against him, resting her head on his chest, beneath his chin. His eyes softened on her form. So many long years she must have spent in her self-isolation. His arms came up and embraced her, one going around her waist, the other through her fiery red hair. Will you rebuild? She questioned softly as her tails wrapped around them. Yes, I will. He spoke softly as he closed his eyes, letting his head lean on hers. She smiled, faintly hearing the cries of his companions as they searched for him. You'll do just fine, Naruto, just fine. That's it for the part 6 of this series. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.